My sister called me at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. Her voice was dry, detached, like she was ordering a sandwich rather than delivering a tragedy. Mom died last night, Sophia. Heart failure. I already handled the cremation to save money, so do not bother asking to see the body. Oh, and the will leaves everything to me, so if you are planning to come down here begging for gas money, save the trip. I let out a choked sob, clutching the phone tight. But there were no tears in my eyes. I was looking directly across my marble kitchen island. My mother Viola was standing right there, very much alive, holding a glass of vintage Pinot Noir, and staring at the phone in absolute horror. Before I tell you what we did next, let me know in the comments if you have ever caught a family member in a lie so big it could send them to prison. Hit like and subscribe because you are going to want to see how this funeral for the living turns out. My name is Sophia, and at 32 years old, my family thinks I am a failure. To my sister Ebony and her husband Brad, I am just a hired help, a line cook who scrapes by on minimum wage and makes poor life decisions. They have no idea that the Chicago penthouse I was standing in belongs to me, or that the beef Wellington resting on the counter was not for a client, but for my mother who visits me every month. The air in my kitchen smelled of truffles and rosemary, a sharp contrast to the toxic sewage spewing from my phone speaker. I had put Ebony on speaker the moment she called, sensing something was wrong. My mother's hand was trembling as she set her wine glass down on the granite countertop. She did not scream. She did not cry. She just stood there, her eyes wide, listening to her eldest daughter pronounce her dead. I forced my voice to crack, playing the part of the broken, impoverished sister they loved to hate. Ebony, what do you mean she is gone? I asked, leaning into the performance. I just talked to her last week. Why did not you call me sooner, and why cremation? You know Mom wanted to be buried next to Dad. On the other end of the line, I heard the distinctive click of a lighter and a deep exhale. Ebony was smoking indoors again, probably in Mom's favorite armchair. Look, Sophia. I made an executive decision. Burials are expensive, and unlike you, I do not have the luxury of living in a fantasy world. The cremation is done. The ashes are in an urn on the mantel. It is over. We are holding a memorial service on Friday, but honestly, if you cannot afford a plane ticket, do not put yourself in debt. We are selling the house immediately to cover her medical bills, so there is no place for you to stay anyway. My mother's face went from shocked to stone cold. She signaled for me to keep going. I took a deep breath. Medical bills, Mom had full coverage. What are you talking about? Ebony laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. You really do not know anything, do you? Mom's insurance lapsed months ago. I have been paying for everything out of pocket. Brad and I are drowning in debt because of her, so the house goes to us. It is only fair. Now I have to go. I have a meeting with the realtor in the morning. If you come, wear black and try not to look like you just rolled out of a shelter. The line went dead. The silence in my penthouse was deafening. I looked at my mother. Viola Davis, no relation to the actress, but just as dramatic and regal, straightened her silk robe. She walked over to the counter, picked up the carving knife, and sliced a perfect piece of the beef Wellington I had spent 3 hours preparing. She took a bite, chewed slowly, and swallowed. So she said, her voice calm but dangerous, I am dead. And I died broke. And your brother-in-law Brad, who has not paid a bill in his life, is suddenly covering my expenses. I poured myself a glass of water, my hands shaking now from adrenaline, not grief. Mom, they forged a death certificate. You cannot just cremate someone without paperwork. They must have found a doctor to sign off on it. This is fraud, Mom. This is prison time. Mom took another sip of wine. Her eyes were focused on something far away, perhaps the memory of how she used to braid Ebony's hair or how she helped Brad get his real estate license when no one else would hire him. Do not call the police yet, she said softly. I stared at her. Mom, they are selling your house. The house Dad built. They are going to empty your bank accounts by morning if they have not already. Let them, Mom said. A cold smile played on her lips. If we stop them now, they will just say it was a misunderstanding. They will say they made a mistake. No, we need to let them dig the hole deep enough that they can never climb out. She looked at me, her eyes sharp. You represent everything they hate, Sophia. You are independent. You are self-made. And because you never bragged about your money, they think you are weak. They think you are stupid. Go down there. Play the part. Let them treat you like dirt. Let them show the world exactly who they are. I understood immediately. This was not just about the house. This was about years of disrespect, years of Ebony looking down her nose at me. Because I chose culinary school over law school, years of Brad making inappropriate jokes about my income. They wanted the struggling sister, I would give them the struggling sister. I went to my walk-in closet, bypassing the rows of designer blazers and custom-fitted chef coats. I reached into the back, pulling out an old duffel bag. I packed faded jeans, oversized hoodies, and a pair of scuffed sneakers I used for gardening. I took off my diamond stud earrings and replaced them with cheap plastic hoops. I removed my Apple Watch and put on a battered Casio. Mom, I said, zipping up the bag. You stay here. I will hire private security to watch the building just in case. Do not answer your phone. Do not log into Facebook. As far as the world is concerned, Viola Davis is ash in an urn. I will be a ghost, she promised. But Sophia, bring me back their heads. I took the elevator down to the garage, ignoring my white Mercedes G-Wagon. Instead, I walked over to the dusty corner where I kept Old Betsy, a rusted 2005 Ford F-150 I used for hauling restaurant equipment and visiting farmers markets incognito. The engine sputtered and coughed before roaring to life, sounding like a dying animal. It was perfect. As I pulled out of the garage and hit the highway towards Atlanta, the city lights blurring in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange sense of calm. Ebony and Brad thought they were predators feasting on a carcass. They had no idea they had just invited a wolf into their home. I patted the pocket of my hoodie, feeling the cold metal of a high-fidelity voice recorder. The drive would take 12 hours. I had 12 hours to prepare myself to be humiliated, insulted, and dismissed. I had 12 hours to mourn the sister I used to have because once I arrived in Atlanta, Ebony was not my family anymore. She was my target. The funeral was set for Friday, but the real burial was just beginning. The drive to Buckhead took longer than expected, mostly because Old Betsy, my rusted pickup truck, struggled to climb the manicured hills of Atlanta's wealthiest district. The engine sputtered and wheezed, drawing disgusted looks from drivers in gleaming Teslas and Range Rovers. It was the perfect entrance. I needed to look like exactly what my sister and her husband thought: I was a desperate, broke failure coming to beg for scraps. As I turned onto the familiar oak-lined street of my childhood, my grip tightened on the steering wheel. The house stood on a rise, a sprawling brick colonial that my father had built with his own hands and money earned from decades of hard labor. It was supposed to be a sanctuary. Instead, it looked like a crime scene. A massive dumpster sat in the driveway, already overflowing, but it was the front lawn that made my blood run cold. It was littered with debris, but not trash. It was my mother's life. I saw her collection of vintage jazz records baking in the hot Georgia sun. I saw the hand-stitched quilts my grandmother had made piled up like dirty laundry. I saw the gardening tools she had used to cultivate the prize-winning hydrangeas that lined the porch, now thrown haphazardly into the grass. Men in blue coveralls were hauling furniture out of the front door, moving with a speed that suggested they were being paid a bonus for recklessness. Standing in the middle of the chaos, barking orders into a cell phone, was Brad. My brother-in-law looked like he was vibrating with anxiety. He was wearing a suit that was too tight in the shoulders, trying to project an image of authority, but sweat was already staining his collar. He was pacing back and forth, checking his phone every 3 seconds, his eyes darting around the property like a trapped animal. I pulled the truck up to the curb, letting the engine backfire loudly before killing the ignition. Brad jumped at the sound. When he saw me climbing out of the cab wearing my faded hoodie and worn-out jeans, his expression shifted from startled to sneering. He hung up his phone and marched down the driveway to intercept me before I could even step onto the grass. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," Brad said, his voice dripping with condescension. He crossed his arms over his chest, physically blocking my path to the front door. "We thought you might have run out of gas halfway here. I hope you did not expect a welcoming committee, Sophia. As you can see, we are busy handling the estate." I looked past him at the movers who were currently dragging my mother's favorite armchair across the asphalt driveway. The sound of the fabric tearing against the pavement made my stomach lurch. "Brad, what is going on?" I asked, keeping my voice trembling and low. Ebony said, "Mom just died last night. Why are you throwing everything away? We have not even had the funeral yet." Brad let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. He took a step closer, invading my personal space, trying to intimidate me with his height. "That is exactly why you are not in charge, Sophia. You are too emotional. You do not understand business. We have a buyer lined up who wants the property vacant by Monday. We are clearing out the junk so we can stage the house. Ebony and I are doing the hard work while you drive around in that piece of scrap metal." I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming. Junk. He was calling 40 years of memories junk. But then my eyes caught something. As Brad gestured dismissively toward the house, his sleeve rode up. Glinting in the sunlight on his left wrist was a watch. It was not just any watch. It was a Patek Philippe Calatrava gold with a leather strap. My father's watch. The one Dad had worn every single day until he died. The one Mom kept in a locked velvet box in her safe, swearing it would only go to a grandson who earned it. I stared at the watch, feeling a wave of nausea. "That is Dad's watch," I whispered, pointing at his wrist. Brad quickly pulled his sleeve down, covering the timepiece, but the guilt flashed across his face for a split second before he masked it with arrogance. "Oh, this," he said, smoothing his cuff. "Your mother gave this to me months ago. She said she wanted the man of the house to have it since she did not have a son. It was a gift, Sophia. Not that you would know anything about that. Mom knew I would appreciate the craftsmanship." Liar. My mother would sooner set that watch on fire than let it touch the skin of a man who gambled away his own mortgage payments. But I could not blow my cover. I had to play the long game. I lowered my head, feigning defeat. "Can I at least go inside?" I asked. "I just want to see her room one last time, maybe get a few photos." Brad shook his head, planting his feet firmly. "No can do. Liability issues. We cannot have you wandering around, possibly slipping and falling and then trying to sue us. Besides," he added, his eyes raking over my baggy clothes, "we do not want anything going missing. There are valuable items in there, Sophia. We need to inventory everything for the estate. I cannot risk you pocketing something to pawn for rent money." The accusation was so rich, coming from a man wearing a stolen watch, that I almost laughed. But before I could respond, his phone rang again. The ringtone was loud and jarring. Brad looked at the screen, and his face went pale. The arrogance evaporated instantly, replaced by pure panic. He turned away from me, answering the call in a hushed, frantic whisper. "Yeah, I know what time it is," he hissed into the phone, walking a few paces away toward the garage. "I told you the liquidity is coming. I just need until Tuesday. No, do not come here. I have the assets. I just need to liquidate." He was distracted. This was my chance. While he was busy pleading with his bookie or loan shark or whoever held the leash to his life, I slipped past him. I did not go to the front door where the movers were bottlenecked. I went around the side through the overgrown trellis that led to the kitchen entrance. The door was unlocked. I stepped inside, and the silence of the house hit me harder than the noise outside. The kitchen was empty. Not just clean, but stripped. The copper pots that used to hang from the ceiling were gone. The island where Mom and I used to make biscuits on Sunday mornings was bare. I moved silently through the hallway, the hardwood floors creaking softly under my sneakers. The living room was a shell. The paintings were gone from the walls, leaving rectangular outlines of dust where they had hung for decades. It felt less like a house, and more like a carcass that had been picked clean by vultures. I needed to see the study. That was where Dad had kept his business papers and where Mom kept the safe. If Brad was wearing the watch, that meant they had already cracked it. I moved quickly, dodging a mover who was carrying a stack of books, and ducked into the office at the back of the house. The heavy oak door was ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room smelled of stale cigar smoke and old paper, a scent that usually brought me comfort. But today it smelled of violation. The massive mahogany desk was covered in papers, drawers pulled out and dumped upside down. But my eyes went straight to the corner behind the bookshelf. The false panel had been ripped off the wall, exposing the heavy steel safe. It had not been opened with a combination. The metal around the lock was twisted and scarred, bearing the unmistakable marks of a heavy-duty diamond drill. They had brute forced their way in. I walked over and peered into the dark cavern of the safe. It was completely empty. The velvet box for the watch was gone. The folder containing the property deeds was gone. The emergency cash Mom kept in a sealed envelope was gone. But then I saw something they had missed. Or perhaps something they had deemed worthless. Shoved all the way to the back, crumpled in the corner of the safe, was a single sheet of blue paper. I reached in and pulled it out. It was a letter written in my father's handwriting, dated 2 days before he died. It wasn't a legal document. It was a note to Mom. I unfolded it, my hands shaking. Viola, if you are reading this, I am gone. But know that I have secured the future. The land is not just land. The survey is in the safety deposit box at the bank, not here. Do not tell the kids unless you have to. Love, H. I froze. Brad and Ebony had drilled the safe, stolen the jewelry and the cash, and thought they had won. But they had missed the most important thing. They did not know about the bank box. They did not know about the survey. And most importantly, they did not know that standing in this looted room reading this letter was the only person who knew exactly what that land was really worth. I folded the blue paper and tucked it into my bra. A floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around expecting to see Brad, but the doorway was empty. I exhaled, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had to get out of here before they found me, but now I knew 2 things for sure. First, Brad was desperate enough to commit a felony. And second, he had absolutely no idea what he was actually selling. The game had just changed, and I was holding the ace. I tucked the blue note securely inside my bra, right next to my beating heart, and smoothed down my oversized hoodie. I took a moment to compose myself in the hallway, listening to the cacophony of voices drifting from the dining room. It sounded less like a house of mourning and more like a cocktail party. Glasses clinked, laughter erupted, and low bass music thumped from a Bluetooth speaker. I recognized the playlist. It was the top 40 hits my mother despised. She had always preferred Aretha Franklin or Sam Cooke, but tonight her house was being desecrated by auto-tune and shallow beats. I took a deep breath, plastered a look of exhausted defeat on my face, and stepped into the lion's den. The dining room was packed. I recognized about half the faces. There were cousins I had not seen in a decade, neighbors who had never once brought Mom a casserole when she was sick, and a slew of Brad's flashy friends who looked like they sold used cars for a living. The table was laden with food, but it was not the soul food Mom used to make. It was catered trays of dry chicken, cold pasta salad, and cheap store-bought rolls still in the plastic bag. At the head of the table sat Ebony, holding court like a queen on her throne. She was wearing a black dress that screamed for attention, with the interlocking G logo of Gucci patterned all over it. She was laughing loudly, throwing her head back as she recounted a story that I knew for a fact was a lie. When she saw me, the laughter cut off abruptly. The room went quiet as all eyes turned to the doorway. I stood there in my scuffed sneakers and baggy jeans, looking every bit the poor relation. Ebony looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. "Oh, good," she announced, her voice pitching high enough to carry to the back of the room. "The help has finally arrived. I was beginning to worry we would have to serve ourselves." A few of Brad's friends snickered. I kept my head down, walking toward the table. "I just wanted to get something to eat, Ebony. I drove 12 hours straight." Ebony stood up, walked over to a pile of boxes in the corner, and pulled out a stained floral apron. It was Mom's old gardening apron, the one she wore when she was elbow-deep in fertilizer. Ebony tossed it at me. It hit my chest and slid to the floor. If you want to eat, you earn your keep, she said, cold and sharp. This isn't a charity kitchen, Sophia. We are short-staffed because I spent all our liquid cash on the cremation and organizing this reception. Since you are a quote-unquote professional cook, why don't you make yourself useful? Heat up the appetizers and make sure everyone has a full glass. Maybe then, I will let you take a plate of leftovers to the motel, assuming you can afford a motel. The humiliation burned hot under my skin, but I forced myself to bend down and pick up the apron. This was the test. If I fought back now, I would blow my cover. I tied the dirty strings around my waist. Sure, Ebony, I said quietly. Whatever you need. Excellent, she smirked, turning back to her guests. See? She knows her place. Some people are born to lead and some are born to wash the dishes. It is just genetics. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking not from shame, but from the effort of not grabbing the carving knife on the counter. I loaded a tray with lukewarm crab cakes and cheap champagne, then headed back out to circulate among the vultures. Being the server had one distinct advantage. People treat service staff like furniture. They talk as if you aren't even there. I moved from cluster to cluster, offering napkins and refilling glasses, keeping my ears open. Near the window, I heard Brad talking to a man in a shiny gray suit. The market is hot right now, Brad was saying, sweating despite the air conditioning. We are listing it as a tear down. The land value alone is massive. We are looking to close by Tuesday. Just a quick flip. We are going to reinvest the capital into a tech startup in Silicon Valley. I almost snorted. Tech startup? He meant his bookie's pocket. The man in the gray suit nodded. Shame about the old lady, though. Did she suffer? Brad shrugged, downing his drink. Who knows? She was old. Her mind was gone anyway. Honestly, it is a blessing. She was becoming a burden on Ebony. We were paying thousands a month for her care. I gripped the tray so hard my knuckles turned white. They were not paying a dime. I had paid every single bill for Mom's care for the last 5 years. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and moved to the main table. Aunt Sarah, a distant cousin of my father, was sitting near Ebony. Sarah was one of the few people who actually knew my father's wishes. She looked uncomfortable picking at her dry chicken. Ebony, Sarah asked, her voice wavering. I thought Viola wanted this house to stay in the family. Your father built this place with his own hands. He always said he wanted his grandchildren to run through these halls. The table went quiet. Ebony didn't miss a beat. She took a sip of her wine and sighed dramatically. I know, Auntie. It breaks my heart too. But you have to understand, Mom was not lucid at the end. She was confused. She begged me to sell it. She grabbed my hand in the hospital and said, Ebony, promise me you will take care of yourself. Sell the house. Live your life. Liar. Mom was not even in a hospital. She was in my guest bedroom watching Netflix. But what about the deed? Sarah pressed. Did she sign it over? Ebony's eyes flashed with annoyance. Of course she did. We handled all the paperwork weeks ago. She transferred the title to me and Brad to avoid probate. She knew Sophia couldn't handle the responsibility of a property this size. Sophia can barely handle a rent payment. I was standing right behind Ebony now, holding a silver boat filled with red wine reduction sauce for the beef. The lie was so bold, so legally treacherous, that I marveled at her stupidity. She had just admitted to the room that she manipulated a dying woman. Oh, Sophia, Ebony snapped, sensing my presence without looking at me. Refill my glass, and put some of that sauce on my beef. It is too dry. Probably because you let it sit out too long. I stepped forward. The sauce was thick, dark crimson, almost like blood. I looked at the back of her dress. I looked at the interlocking G pattern. From this distance, the poor stitching was obvious. It was a Canal Street knockoff, probably costing $50, but she wore it like it was couture. I leaned in, tilting the gravy boat. Oops, I whispered. I did not just drip it, I poured it. A steady, warm stream of sticky red sauce cascaded down the back of her fake Gucci dress, soaking into the cheap synthetic fabric instantly. Ebony screamed. It was a high-pitched shriek that shattered the conversation. She jumped up, spinning around, her eyes bulging. "You idiot! You clumsy, useless idiot, look what you did! This is Gucci. This cost $3,000. I stood there holding the empty boat, my face a mask of fake apology. "I am so sorry, Ebony. I tripped. My shoes are old, the sole is coming off." She did not wait for an explanation. The rage took over. She drew her hand back and swung. The sound of the slap cracked through the room like a pistol shot. It was hard enough to snap my head to the side. My cheeks stung instantly, the heat spreading across my face. The room went dead silent. Even the music seemed to stop. I slowly turned my head back to look at her. I tasted blood inside my lip. The old Sophia, the one who craved her approval, would have cried. The old Sophia would have run away. But I just touched my cheek, looked at the red sauce dripping down her legs like a crime scene, and stared her dead in the eyes. "I am sorry about your dress," I said, my voice steady and cold. "But I think red is your color. It matches your hands." Ebony was breathing heavy, her chest heaving. "Get out," she hissed. "Get out of my house before I have Brad throw you out." I untied the dirty apron and let it drop to the floor right on top of her ruined shoes. "I am going," I said. "I will see you at the funeral, sister." I walked out of the dining room, past the stunned guests, past a pale-faced Brad, and out the front door. My cheek was throbbing, but as I walked into the cool night air to my truck, I smiled. She had just assaulted me in front of 20 witnesses. She had admitted to coercion regarding the deed. And I had it all on tape. The slap was not a defeat. It was the final piece of evidence I needed to bury her. The next morning, I left my rusted pickup truck parked 3 blocks away in a Walmart parking lot. If I was going to sell the narrative that I was destitute, I had to commit fully. I waited at the bus stop for 40 minutes in the humid Atlanta heat, surrounded by people who looked just as tired and beaten down by life as I was pretending to be. When the bus finally hissed to a halt, I climbed aboard, keeping my head down and clutching my worn-out purse close to my chest. The ride to the outskirts of the city was bumpy and smelled of diesel fumes and unwashed bodies. I sat near the back, watching the scenery change from the manicured lawns of Buckhead to cracked sidewalks and payday loan centers. My destination was Sunny Meadows Extended Care Facility. The name was a cruel joke. There was nothing sunny about the gray, blocky building that loomed behind a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. The grass was dead, the windows were grimy, and even from the street the place radiated a sense of neglect. This was where Ebony claimed she had put our mother. This was where she said Viola Davis had taken her last breath. Just looking at the peeling paint on the front door made my blood boil. Even if it was a lie, the fact that my sister would use this hellhole as a setting for her fabrication showed exactly how little she valued human dignity. I shuffled into the lobby, affecting a slight limp. The air conditioning was broken, and the room smelled faintly of bleach and boiled cabbage. Behind the reception desk sat a woman who looked like she had been working for 3 days straight. She was scrolling through her phone, barely glancing up as the automatic doors wheezed open. I approached the desk slowly, making my hands tremble as I reached for the sign-in sheet. "Excuse me, ma'am," I whispered, my voice raspy. "I am looking for my mother's records. My sister told me she passed away here last night. Viola Davis." The receptionist sighed, finally looking up. Her name tag read LaToya. She looked me up and down, taking in my baggy hoodie and the dark circles I had carefully applied under my eyes with makeup. She softened just a fraction. "Honey, if she passed last night, the body would have been moved to the mortuary by now. We do not keep them here." "I know," I said, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. I was not there. I live out of state. I did not get to say goodbye. I just want to know if she was in pain. My sister said it was heart failure, but I need to know if she was peaceful. Please, I do not have much, but I just need some closure." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. It was a pathetic bribe compared to the thousands I usually tipped my staff, but for the character I was playing, it was a sacrifice. I slid it across the counter beneath a tissue. LaToya looked at the money, then at the empty lobby, and slid it into her pocket. "Let me check the night log," she muttered, typing slowly on her computer. Davis. Davis. Viola. She frowned, squinting at the screen. That is strange. My heart skipped a beat. What is it? I am not seeing a discharge time for a body, she said. In fact, I am not seeing a patient file for a Viola Davis in the active system at all. Are you sure she was here under that name? I leaned in closer. My desperation real now, though, for a different reason. Yes, my sister Ebony swore she was in room 304. Can you check the physical charts? Maybe the computer is slow. Latoya sighed again but stood up. She walked over to a metal filing cabinet behind the desk. Hold on, sometimes Dr. Sterling does the paperwork by hand and forgets to input it until the end of the week. He is messy like that. She pulled out a manila folder and flipped it open. Her brow furrowed. Okay, here it is. But this does not make sense. It says she was admitted 2 days ago, but there are no nurse notes, no vitals, just an admission form and, yeah, a death certificate signed by Dr. Sterling. Can I see it? I begged. Please. She hesitated, then glanced at the security camera, which was pointed safely away from us. Make it quick. I grabbed the folder. My eyes scanned the documents. It was sloppy work. The admission form was filled out in Ebony's handwriting, not Mom's. The signature was a shaky scrawl that looked nothing like my mother's elegant script. But it was the death certificate that froze my blood. It listed the cause of death as acute myocardial infarction. Cardiac arrest. The time of death was recorded as 7:42 p.m. last night. I pulled out my phone, shielding it with my body so the camera would not catch me. I snapped a high-resolution photo of the document. Then I quickly opened my photo gallery and scrolled back to last night. At 7:42 p.m. I had taken a picture of Mom. She was not clutching her chest in a dirty room at Sunny Meadows. She was sitting in a plush white robe at the spa at the Four Seasons in Chicago, laughing because I had put cucumber slices on her eyes. The timestamp on my phone was undeniable proof. At the exact minute Dr. Sterling claimed my mother's heart stopped in Atlanta, she was sipping herbal tea 600 miles away. I was about to hand the file back when the automatic doors whooshed open behind me. Latoya's eyes went wide. She snatched the folder from my hands and shoved it under the desk. Act normal, she hissed. It is the doctor. I turned around slowly, hunching my shoulders to appear smaller. A man strode into the lobby wearing a pristine white lab coat that looked out of place in this dingy facility. He was tall with slicked back hair and a face that was handsome in a slimy used car salesman kind of way. I recognized him immediately from Ebony's Instagram stories. Dr. Marcus Sterling, the man she went to college with, the man who had been at her wedding. He was talking loudly on his cell phone, ignoring the patients in wheelchairs lining the hallway. Yeah. Ebony, I handled it, he was saying, his voice echoing off the linoleum floors. The paperwork is filed. You can proceed with the estate sale. Just make sure my fee is in the account by Monday. I stuck my neck out for this. I froze. He was confessing to the crime right in front of me. I fumbled for the voice recorder in my pocket, trying to slide the switch to on without drawing attention. Dr. Sterling stopped at the front desk, drumming his fingers on the countertop. Latoya, did you process the batch from last night? Yes, Dr. Latoya said, her voice trembling slightly. She avoided looking at me. Good, he said. Then he turned his head and looked directly at me. Who is this? My stomach dropped. I was wearing a hood, but if he looked closely, he might recognize me from family photos even though Ebony kept them hidden. I coughed loudly, covering the lower half of my face with my hand. Just a delivery girl, Latoya lied quickly, bless her heart. She was just dropping off lunch for the residents. Dr. Sterling wrinkled his nose, looking at my dirty sneakers. Well, tell her to use the back entrance next time. We are running a medical facility here, not a homeless shelter. He turned back to Latoya. I will be in my office. If anyone calls about the Davis file, send them directly to me. Do not answer any questions. Understood? Yes, sir, Latoya whispered. He spun on his heel and marched down the hallway, still talking on his phone. I waited until he was out of earshot before exhaling the breath I had been holding. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. This was not just a family dispute anymore. This was a criminal conspiracy. They had a doctor on payroll falsifying medical records to facilitate theft. I looked at Latoya. She looked terrified. She knew something was wrong. "Thank you," I whispered to her. "You have no idea how much you just helped me." She looked at me, her eyes sad and knowing. "Honey, I do not know what is going on, but take that picture and get out of here. Dr. Sterling is not a good man. If he finds out you have that, he will not just call the police. He has friends in low places." I nodded and turned to the door. I walked out into the oppressive heat of the parking lot, clutching my phone like a lifeline. I had the photo. I had the timestamp. I had the confirmation that my mother was legally dead in Georgia while being very much alive in Illinois. As I walked back to the bus stop, I pulled up the photo of the death certificate again. Cause of death: heart failure. I looked at the signature: Marcus Sterling, MD. I let out a dark, humorless laugh. They thought they had buried Viola Davis. They thought they had erased her existence with a pen stroke and a fake timestamp. But as I boarded the bus back to the city, watching the grim facade of Sunny Meadows fade into the distance, I knew one thing for sure. Dr. Sterling was right about one thing. There was going to be a heart attack. But it was not going to be my mother's. It was going to be theirs when I dropped this hammer on them. The game was on, and I was done playing defense. The ride back from the nursing home was a blur of anger and calculation. I sat in the back of that humid bus, clutching my phone like it was a grenade. I had the proof that my mother was alive, but proof was not enough. I needed to know the endgame. I needed to know why Brad was sweating through his suits and why Ebony was willing to commit federal fraud. When I finally made it back to the house, the sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the lawn where my mother's garden used to bloom. The movers were gone, leaving the driveway empty, except for a few oil stains. Brad's BMW was parked haphazardly on the grass, a sign of his fraying mental state. I let myself in through the kitchen door, moving as quietly as a shadow. The house was silent, but it was a heavy, pregnant silence. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the only piece of furniture they had not managed to drag out yet. I knew they were upstairs in the master bedroom, probably plotting their next move. This was my window. I reached into my bag and pulled out two small black discs. They were high-powered listening devices I used in my restaurants to monitor the service quality in the dining rooms. But tonight, they were going to be the tools of my survival. I crept up the back staircase, the one the servants used in the old days. The carpet was worn, muffling my footsteps. I could hear voices drifting from the master suite. Ebony was complaining about the heat, about the guests, about me. Brad was pacing. I could hear the heavy thud of his shoes hitting the hardwood floor, back and forth, back and forth. I waited until I heard the bathroom door slam shut and the shower turn on. Ebony was washing off the red wine sauce I had spilled on her. Perfect. I slipped into the bedroom. The room was chaotic, filled with half-packed boxes. I moved quickly to the nightstand on Brad's side of the bed. I stuck one device underneath the heavy mahogany table deep in the corner where no one would look. I placed the second one behind the headboard of the bed. It took less than 10 seconds. I was back out in the hallway before the shower stopped running. I retreated to the guest room down the hall, a small dusty space they had designated for me. I did not stay there, though. I climbed out the window onto the porch roof and shimmied down the trellis, just like I used to do when I was 16, sneaking out to meet boys. I made my way to my truck, parked down the street, locked the doors, and put on my headphones. The audio feed was crystal clear. It picked up the sound of the bathroom door opening, the rustle of towels, and then the sound I had been waiting for. Brad's phone rang. He did not answer it immediately. I heard him exhale a shaky, terrified sound. Then he picked up. "Hey, Rocco." Brad's voice was tight, pitched higher than usual. "I told you not to call me on this line." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. I could not hear the other side, but I did not need to. Brad's reaction told me everything. I know it is a lot of money, Brad stammered. $800,000 is not something I can just pull out of an ATM. But I have the asset. I told you. The house is in Buckhead. It is prime real estate. The land alone is worth millions. He paused again, and then his voice dropped to a desperate whisper. No, do not come to the funeral. Please, man. I have a buyer. A cash buyer. They are looking for a quick close. We buy ugly houses type of deal. They are offering 1.5 million cash, fast closing. I know it is worth 5, but I need the speed. I will have your money by Tuesday. Tuesday night. I swear on my life. I sat in my truck, my blood running cold. 1.5 million. The property was appraised at nearly $5 million, especially with the commercial zoning changes coming next year. Brad was willing to sell my father's legacy for 30 cents on the dollar just to save his own skin. He had gambled away nearly $1 million on football and crypto, and now he was using my mother's home as his getaway car. I heard the bedroom door open. Ebony walked in. I could hear her voice sharp and demanding. Who are you talking to, Brad? You look like you are about to throw up. Brad hung up the phone instantly. Just business, baby. Just closing the deal on the Silicon Valley investment. Ebony sighed, the sound of mattress springs creaking as she sat down. We need to talk about the sale. The realtor said if we list it properly, we could get a bidding war going. We could wait a month and get top dollar. No, Brad shouted. The audio spiked, hurting my ears. I lowered the volume. No waiting, Ebony. We sell now. We sell to the investment group I found. They have cash ready. We sign the papers on Monday, the funds clear Tuesday. We cannot risk the market crashing. But Brad, Ebony argued, her voice suspicious. Their offer is insulting. It is a third of what the house is worth. Why are we rushing? Mom is dead. The house isn't going anywhere. And Sophia is sniffing around. She was asking about the safe. Forget Sophia, Brad snapped. He was unraveling. Listen to me, Ebony. We take the cash offer. We take the money and we go to Europe for a year, like we always talked about. If we wait the taxes, the probate, it will all eat up the profit. Do you want to be rich next week, or do you want to be stuck in court for 2 years? Ebony was silent for a long moment. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. Greed was warring with common sense. Finally, greed won. Fine, she said quietly. But we need to get Sophia to sign the waiver. If she contests the will, the cash buyer will walk away. She is stubborn, Brad. She has that look in her eye. I do not think $5,000 is going to cut it. I leaned forward in my seat, pressing the headphones closer to my ears. Brad's voice changed. It went from frantic to something much darker. It was a cold, flat tone that sent shivers down my spine. She will sign, Brad said. And if she does not, we handle it. What do you mean, handle it? Ebony asked. I mean, accidents happen, Brad said. His voice was so low I had to strain to hear it. She drives that piece of junk truck. The brakes on those things are notoriously bad. Or maybe she has a little mishap on the highway driving back to Chicago. People fall asleep at the wheel all the time. Brad, Ebony whispered, sounding horrified but not stopping him. You are talking about my sister. I am talking about our survival, Brad yelled, losing control again. I cannot lose this deal, Ebony. I cannot. If she drags this out, if she files an injunction, I am a dead man. Literally. So you choose. Your sister, who you hate anyway, or your husband. Because if she does not sign that paper on Monday, I will make sure she never makes it to the funeral on Tuesday. I cannot lose my legs over a line cook. The feed went silent for a moment, save for the sound of their breathing. Then Ebony spoke. Her voice was small, trembling, but decisive. Make it look like an accident, and do not tell me the details. I tore the headphones off my head, throwing them onto the passenger seat. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the steering wheel. I gasped for air, feeling like the cab of the truck was shrinking around me. They were not just thieves, they were not just liars, they were conspiring to murder me. Brad was cornered a rat facing a trap, and he was willing to kill to chew his way out. And my sister, my own flesh and blood, she had just signed my death warrant to protect a man who was lying to her face. I looked at the house looming dark and ominous on the hill. The light in the master bedroom turned off. They were going to sleep, resting up for their big payday. I reached for my phone and texted the security team I had hired to watch my mother in Chicago. Target acquired, I typed. Level threat increased to red. Send backup to Atlanta. I am not the hunter anymore. I am the bait. I started the engine of Old Betsy. I wasn't going to sleep in the guest room tonight. I needed to be alive on Tuesday to see the look on their faces when the dead woman walked through the church doors. But first, I had to survive the weekend with a brother-in-law who had just put a price on my head. Brad wanted an accident. I gripped the gear shift, my eyes narrowing in the darkness. I would give him a collision he would never walk away from. The law office of Gables and Associates was located in a strip mall between a vape shop and a discount dry cleaner that smelled faintly of chemicals and desperation. It was a far cry from the glass-walled firm where my mother's actual estate attorney, Mr. Henderson, practiced. This place had flickering fluorescent lights, a carpet that had not seen a vacuum since the 90s, and a receptionist who was currently filing her nails while chewing gum with her mouth open. I sat on a folding metal chair, clutching my purse, trying to look like the terrified broke sister they expected me to be. To my right sat Ebony and Brad. They looked like royalty visiting a slum. Ebony was wearing another black dress, this one clearly bought with credit, and oversized sunglasses that she refused to take off indoors. Brad was bouncing his leg nervously, his eyes darting to the door every time a car drove past outside. He was still waiting for his money, and I was the only obstacle left in his way. The door to the inner office opened, and a man waddled out. Mr. Gables was short, sweating profusely, and wearing a suit that was 2 sizes too small. He wiped his forehead with a handkerchief that looked gray with use. I knew exactly who he was. He was a disbarred real estate agent who had barely passed the bar exam on his 4th try. He was cheap, he was unethical, and he was exactly the kind of lawyer Brad would hire. "Please come in," Mr. Gables wheezed, gesturing us into his cramped office. The desk was covered in stacks of paper, and the air conditioner in the window was rattling violently, doing nothing to combat the heat. We sat down. I made sure to sit as far away from Brad as possible, keeping my back to the wall. Mr. Gables cleared his throat and picked up a single sheet of paper. It was not a formal legal document on heavy bond paper. It was a piece of lined notebook paper torn from a spiral notebook. My heart hammered against my ribs, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what I was seeing. "We are here to read the last will and testament of Viola Davis," Mr. Gables announced, his voice trembling slightly. He avoided making eye contact with me. "This document was found in Mrs. Davis's personal effects and supersedes all previous wills." He began to read. "I, Viola Davis, being of sound mind and body, do hereby leave all my worldly possessions to my beloved daughter Ebony. This includes the house in Buckhead, all bank accounts, jewelry, and vehicles. Ebony has been my rock and my caretaker. To my other daughter, Sophia, I leave my collection of old cookbooks, as she enjoys cooking, and I hope she can make a living someday. Signed, Viola Davis." The room went silent. I stared at the paper in his hands. The handwriting was jagged, frantic scrawl that looked nothing like my mother's elegant cursive. It looked remarkably like Ebony's handwriting, if she were trying to write with her non-dominant hand. The grammar was poor. The legal terminology was non-existent. It was a forgery so lazy it was insulting. I let out a small, strangled gasp, covering my mouth with my hands. "That is it," I whispered, making my voice tremble. "Cookbooks. But Mom promised to help me with my rent. She knew I was behind. She knew I was struggling." Ebony took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that were cold and triumphant. "Mom knew a lot of things, Sophia. She knew you were irresponsible. She knew you would just waste the money on nonsense. She wanted the family legacy to be safe. That is why she left it to me and Brad. We are the responsible ones. Responsible. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. Brad was sweating through his shirt because he owed a fortune to criminals, and Ebony was wearing a knockoff dress while planning to sell our childhood home for scraps. But the house, I stammered, looking at Mr. Gables. The house is worth millions. You are just going to take it all. I do not have anywhere to live, Ebony. My landlord is threatening to evict me next week. I drove all the way down here on my last tank of gas. Can't you share just a little bit? Even $10,000? Brad scoffed, leaning back in his chair. 10,000. You think money grows on trees, Sophia? We have expenses. The funeral costs are astronomical, and the taxes on the house are going to kill us. We are doing you a favor by not burdening you with the debt. I looked down at my lap, letting my shoulders slump. I needed them to believe I was broken. I needed them to believe I was desperate enough to sign anything for a crumb. Please, I begged, letting a tear slip down my cheek. Just enough for rent. I will do anything. I just cannot be homeless again. Ebony sighed a long, exaggerated sound of annoyance. She reached into her purse and pulled out a bank envelope. She counted out 5 crisp $100 bills. She threw them across the desk. They fluttered down onto the dirty carpet in front of my feet. "Pick it up," she said. I hesitated. The humiliation was visceral. She wanted me to crawl. I said, "Pick it up." Ebony repeated, her voice hard. "That is $500. That is more than you deserve. Consider it a severance package from this family. But if you want to keep it, you have to sign something for us." Mr. Gables quickly slid a document across the desk. It was a formal waiver, much more professional looking than the fake will. It was a waiver of right to contest, stating that I accepted the terms of the will and agreed never to sue the estate or the executors for any reason. It was the golden ticket Brad needed to close the sale with his cash buyer. I bent down and picked up the bills from the floor. I clutched them in my hand like they were precious jewels. Then I looked at the waiver. "If I sign this, I get to keep the money?" I asked softly. "Yes," Brad said, leaning forward eagerly. "You sign that you take the cash and you go back to Chicago. We handle everything else. You never have to worry about this house again." I looked at the pen Mr. Gables was holding out to me. It was a cheap blue Bic pen. I took a deep breath. This was the moment. In the state of Georgia, a signature procured under duress or fraud is invalid. But proving duress is hard. Proving a signature is irregular, however, is much easier. I am right-handed. I have been right-handed my entire life. Ebony knew this. Brad knew this. But in their arrogance, in their rush to get their hands on the deed, they were not paying attention to the details. They only saw the submission. I reached out and took the pen with my left hand. My hand shook violently as I brought the pen to the paper. It was not acting. Writing with my non-dominant hand felt alien and awkward. I pressed down hard, the tip of the pen digging into the paper. I started to write. S-O-P-H-I-A. The letters were jagged. They were slanted the wrong way. The spacing was uneven. It looked like the handwriting of a child or perhaps someone who was having a medical episode. "What are you doing? Why is it taking so long?" Ebony snapped, tapping her manicured nails on the desk. I am just so upset," I sniffled, keeping the pen in my left hand. "My hands are shaking. I cannot help it." "Just finish it," Brad barked. I scribbled the last name, D-A-V-I-S. Then I added a messy, unrecognizable loop at the end. It looked absolutely nothing like my real signature. It was a legal disaster waiting to happen. Any forensic handwriting analyst would look at this and testify that it was either forged or signed by a person under extreme physical or mental distress. I pushed the paper back across the desk. "There," I whispered. "I signed it." Mr. Gables snatched the paper, glancing at it briefly. He did not care about the quality of the signature. He just wanted the box checked. He stamped it with a notary seal immediately. "Done," the lawyer said, wiping more sweat from his brow. "The estate is settled." Ebony stood up, a smug smile spreading across her face. She looked at me with pure pity. "You know, Sophia, this is for the best. You were never cut out for the burden of wealth. Go back to your little kitchen, bake some cookies, leave the business to the adults." She turned and walked out, her heels clicking on the linoleum. Brad lingered for a second, looking at the document with a mixture of relief and disgust. "Do not be late for the funeral tomorrow," he muttered. "It would look bad if you missed it. And spend that money wisely. It is the last dime you are ever getting from us." He followed his wife out the door. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the dirty office. Mr. Gables was already shuffling papers, ignoring me. I stood up, tucking the $500 into my pocket. I walked out into the bright sunlight of the strip mall parking lot. My hands stopped shaking. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Henderson, my mother's real lawyer. "It is done," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I signed the waiver." "Did they notice?" Mr. Henderson asked. "No," I replied, watching Brad's BMW peel out of the parking lot. "I signed it with my left hand." "It looks like a hostage wrote it." "Perfect," Mr. Henderson said. "That document is worth less than the paper it is printed on. But now they think they are safe. They will move the money." "Let them move it," I said, walking toward my truck. "By tomorrow, they won't even own the clothes on their backs." I climbed into old Betsy and looked at the box of cookbooks Ebony had tossed onto the back seat, the only inheritance she had given me. I reached back and picked one up. It was my grandmother's handwritten recipe journal. Ebony had thrown it away like trash, thinking it was useless. She didn't know that tucked inside the back cover was the original combination to the floor safe she thought she had to drill open. I smiled. They had the fake will. I had the keys to the kingdom. And tomorrow at the funeral, I was going to unlock the gates of hell. I left the strip mall and drove old Betsy 3 blocks to a secluded side street behind an abandoned warehouse. I checked my rearview mirror constantly, but there was no sign of Brad's BMW. He was likely too busy high-fiving his wife and counting the money he had not yet received to worry about where his poor defeated sister was going. I pulled the truck into the shadows, killed the engine, and pulled out my other phone, the encrypted one I used for business. I summoned an Uber Black. When the sleek Lincoln Navigator pulled up, the driver hesitated for a moment, looking at my stained hoodie and worn-out sneakers. I simply flashed the screen of my phone showing my platinum status rating, and he unlocked the doors. "Take me to the Ritz-Carlton," I said, sinking into the leather seats. The air conditioning washed over me, a stark contrast to the stifling heat of the lawyer's office. I closed my eyes, letting the persona of the broke-line cook slip away for a moment. I was Sophia Davis, executive chef and silent partner in a $20 million restaurant group, and I was on my way to a war council. The lobby of the Ritz was quiet, smelling of fresh lilies and expensive perfume. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with the well-dressed guests, and made a beeline for the elevators. I swiped the keycard my mother had mailed to me days ago and pressed the button for the penthouse suite. The elevator rose smoothly, lifting me high above the grime and the lies of the streets below. When the doors opened, I stepped into a sanctuary. The suite was expansive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. Sitting on a velvet sofa, wearing a silk caftan and sipping iced tea, was my mother. Viola Davis looked nothing like the frail, deceased woman Ebony had described to the world. She looked vibrant, sharp, and currently very angry. Sitting opposite her was Arthur Henderson, our family's actual attorney for the past 30 years. He was a man of integrity, dressed in a bespoke suit that cost more than Brad's car. "Sophia, Mr. Henderson said, standing up to greet me. He did not hug me. He was not a hugger, but the look in his eyes was one of fierce, protective pride. "I received the scan of the waiver you signed. Using your non-dominant hand was a masterstroke. The forensic analysis will be undeniable." I sat down, taking the glass of water Mom pushed toward me. It was hard, I admitted, my voice shaking slightly as the adrenaline wore off. Watching them, Mom. They are so greedy. They didn't even read the will. They just wanted to know if they got the house. Mom's expression tightened. Did they mention the land survey? No, I said. Brad is panicking. He has a cash buyer lined up for 1.5 million. He wants to close on Monday. Mr. Henderson let out a dry, humorless laugh. He walked over to his briefcase and pulled out a large rolled-up map. He spread it out on the coffee table. 1.5 million, he scoffed. Your brother-in-law is an even bigger fool than I thought. Look at this, Sophia. I leaned forward. It was a zoning map of Buckhead. Our family home was circled in red. The city council held a closed-door meeting last week, Mr. Henderson explained, tapping the map. They approved the rezoning of your mother's entire block. It is no longer residential. It has been designated for high-density, mixed-use commercial development, luxury condos, and retail. I stared at the map. What does that mean for the price? It means, Henderson said, his voice dropping to a whisper, that the land underneath your mother's house is not worth 1 million. It is worth $4.5 million. Conservative estimate. My jaw dropped. 4.5 million. That is why the cash buyer is pushing for a quick close, Mom said, her voice dripping with disdain. They know about the zoning change. They are sharks feeding on a minnow. Brad thinks he is saving his skin, but he is actually handing away a fortune because he is too lazy to do his homework. We have to stop the sale, I said, panic rising in my chest. If they sell it on Monday? No. Mr. Henderson interrupted, holding up a hand. We do absolutely nothing. I looked at him confused. But if they sign the papers, if we stop them now, Henderson said calmly, it is a civil dispute. They claim they made a mistake about your mother's death. They claim they thought she was dead. A judge might slap their wrists, maybe invalidate the deed, but they walk away free. They stay in the family. They keep tormenting you. He leaned in closer, his eyes cold and hard. But if they sell the house, if they sign that deed as the executors of an estate that does not exist, and most importantly, if they accept that wire transfer of $1.5 million into their personal accounts, that is no longer a mistake. That is wire fraud. That is bank fraud. That is theft over $1 million. That is a federal crime with a mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in prison. I looked at Mom. She was nodding slowly. We are giving them the rope, Sophia, she said softly. We are going to let them hang themselves. We let the sale go through. We let the money hit their account. And then at the funeral on Tuesday, we bring the hammer down. The room fell silent. The weight of the plan settled over us. It was ruthless. It was final. It was exactly what they deserved. But I had one more thing to show her, something that would erase any lingering doubt she might have about sending her own daughter to prison. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the large television screen on the wall. Mom? I said, my hand hovering over the play button. There is something else. I installed cameras in the master bedroom. I needed to know what they were saying. But I saw something today that, well, you just need to see it. I pressed play. The video showed the master bedroom from earlier that afternoon while Ebony was out getting her nails done for the funeral. Brad walked into the frame. He looked paranoid, checking the hallway. Then he walked over to Mom's antique vanity. Mom watched in silence as Brad pulled open her lingerie drawer. He began to rifle through it, tossing her silk slips and intimate items onto the floor with careless disregard. He was looking for her hidden jewelry box. He found the small velvet pouch tucked in the back. He poured the contents onto the dresser. Her pearl necklace, the diamond earrings Dad gave her for their 25th anniversary, the sapphire brooch. Brad held the pearls up to the light. Then he did something that made my stomach turn. He bit down on one of the pearls to test its authenticity. Satisfied, he shoved the necklace into his pocket. Then he swept the earrings and the brooch into his pocket as well. He kicked her silk slip under the bed and walked out of the room. I paused the video. I looked at Mom. I expected her to cry. I expected her to be hurt that the man she had welcomed into her home was looting her most private possessions like a common burglar. But Viola Davis did not cry. She stood up slowly and walked to the window. She stared out at the city lights, her reflection ghosting against the glass. Her posture was rigid, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. When she spoke, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "He went through my drawers," she whispered. "He touched my things. He stole the pearls your father put around my neck on the day we renewed our vows." She turned around. Her eyes were dry, burning with a cold, terrifying rage. It was the look of a matriarch who had been pushed past the point of forgiveness. "Arthur," she said to the lawyer, "draft the papers, prepare the police report, call the district attorney." She looked at me. "Sophia," she said, her voice steady and lethal, "I do not want them to just go to jail. I want them to have nothing. I want them to lose the money, the reputation, the friends, and the freedom. I want Brad to rot." She walked over to me, grabbed my shoulders, and looked deep into my eyes. "Kill him," she said. "Not with a gun. Kill him with the truth. Bury him so deep under the weight of his own greed that he never sees the sun again. Do it for me." I nodded, feeling a surge of dark purpose. "I will, Mom, I promised." I left the Ritz-Carlton an hour later, my soul hardened. I was not just fighting for a house anymore. I was the executioner, and Tuesday was going to be Judgment Day. I got back into the Uber, pulled my hood up, and headed back to the House of Lies, ready to play my part in the final act. The house was quiet on the day before the funeral, but it was the silence of a bomb waiting to detonate. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of stale takeout. Ebony and Brad were moving around each other like two feral cats in a cage, their earlier alliance fraying under the pressure of the looming deadline. Brad needed that wire transfer by Tuesday, or he lost his kneecaps. Ebony needed to maintain the illusion of the grieving daughter, while simultaneously coordinating the sale of her mother's legacy. And I sat in the middle of it all, the invisible sister, the broke failure, the observer. I knew I needed to push them. I needed to see exactly how desperate Brad really was. I needed to see if his greed would override his basic human decency, although I already suspected the answer. I sat at the kitchen island, the same place where I had spilled wine on Ebony's dress the night before. I had a stack of mail in front of me, mostly junk that I had brought with me from Chicago to make my cover story look authentic. Mixed in with the overdue notices and grocery circulars was a large, official-looking envelope. It was a prop I had prepared weeks ago, part of a prank I had played on a sous chef, but now it was a weapon. I ripped it open loudly, letting out a gasp that was perfectly calibrated to catch attention. I covered my mouth with my hands, my eyes widening as I pulled out a letter and a check. "Oh my God," I whispered, just loud enough to carry into the living room where Brad was obsessively refreshing his email on his phone. Brad looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with dark circles. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. He stared at me with irritation. "What is it now, Sophia? Did your landlord finally send the eviction notice?" "No," I stammered, my hands trembling as I held the paper. I bought a lottery scratch-off ticket back in Illinois. The jumbo jackpot one. I mailed it in last week. This is the claim letter. I won." Brad froze. The irritation vanished instantly, replaced by a predatory sharpness that made my skin crawl. He stood up slowly, putting his phone in his pocket. He walked into the kitchen, his movements casual but focused. "You won?" he asked, trying to sound indifferent. "How much?" $100. $10,000, I breathed, looking at the check. "It says 10,000. I cannot believe it. This covers my rent for a year. I can fix my truck. I can actually buy groceries." Brad stopped right next to me. He looked down at the paper. It was a very convincing forgery printed on high-quality watermarked paper. His eyes fixated on the number like a starving dog looking at a steak. $10,000. To a man who owed $800,000, It was a drop in the bucket, but to a gambling addict, any cash was oxygen. I saw the wheels turning in his head. He did not see a way to help his sister-in-law. He saw a quick bet. He saw a way to buy a few more days with his bookie. 10,000. Brad whistled low, a fake smile plastering itself onto his face. That is fantastic, Sophia. Really, I am happy for you. He pulled out a stool and sat next to me, invading my personal space. He smelled of nervous sweat and expensive cologne, a nauseating combination. He lowered his voice, leaning in confidentially. Listen, Sophia, he said, his tone dripping with artificial concern. I know you are thinking about paying rent and fixing that old truck. And that is smart. But you have to think bigger. $10,000 sits in a bank account and does nothing. Inflation eats it alive. You know I work in finance, right? I handle portfolios for high net worth individuals. I nodded wide-eyed, playing the naive fool. I know, Brad. You are so successful. Exactly, he said, puffing out his chest. And right now I have an opportunity. It is a crypto arbitrage algorithm I am developing with some partners in Silicon Valley. It is guaranteeing 40% returns weekly. If you give me that 10,000 today, I can turn it into 14,000 by next Friday. By the end of the month, you could have 30 grand. You could buy a new car, Sophia. A real car. I bit my lip, pretending to consider it. But I need the money now, Brad. That is short-term thinking, he chided, gently placing a hand on my shoulder. His touch made me want to recoil, but I stayed still. Wealthy people use money to make money. Poor people spend it. Do you want to be poor forever serving appetizers to people like me? Or do you want to be an investor? I can do this for you off the books. Just sign the check over to me. I will handle the rest. Trust me. I am family. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. This man was stealing my mother's jewelry and selling her house, and now he was trying to hustle me out of my imaginary lottery winnings. I do not know, I whispered. Let me think about it. Take your time. He smiled, his eyes never leaving the check. But markets move fast. Just then, the sound of heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor interrupted his sales pitch. Ebony stood in the doorway. She had just come back from the salon, her hair perfectly coiffed for the funeral, but her face was twisted in a scowl. She looked from Brad's hand on my shoulder to the check on the table, and her eyes narrowed into slits. What is going on here? She demanded, her voice cutting through the room like a serrated knife. Why are you whispering with her, Brad? And why are you touching her? Brad snatched his hand back, as if he had been burned. Nothing, babe. Just talking. Sophia got a little windfall. 10 grand from a lottery ticket. I was just giving her some financial advice. Ebony stormed into the kitchen. She looked at the check, then at me, then at Brad. She saw the hunger in his eyes. She saw the desperation. And for the first time I saw a crack in their united front. Ebony was greedy, but she was also possessive. She hated me, but she hated the idea of her husband needing me even more. Financial advice, she spat, turning on Brad. You are asking her for money. Is that what we have come to? You are begging the help for cash. I am not begging. Brad defended, his face turning red. I am offering her an investment opportunity. I am trying to help her maximize her assets. Oh, please. Ebony laughed, a cruel, harsh sound. You think I am stupid? I know you, Brad. I see the way you look at money. You are sniffing around her like a stray dog. It is pathetic. She is my sister and she is a loser. We do not need her pennies. We are about to close $1 million deal, remember? Or did you forget that because you are too busy trying to hustle 10 grand? Brad stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You do not understand business, Ebony. Capital is capital. You are useless, she screamed, losing control. You are absolutely useless. I am the one handling the estate. I am the one dealing with the funeral home. I am the one lying to my entire family. And what are you doing? Flirting with the maid for lunch money? You are an embarrassment, Brad. An absolute embarrassment. She turned to me, her eyes blazing. And you put that money away. Do not think for a second that $10,000 makes you one of us. You are still the charity case. Now get out of my sight. Both of you. I grabbed the envelope and scrambled off the stool, clutching it to my chest. I ran out of the kitchen, hearing them continue to scream at each other behind me. I retreated to the guest room, my heart pounding. It wasn't fear. It was exhilaration. I had just driven a wedge right down the center of their marriage. Ebony now saw Brad as a liability, a desperate leech. Brad saw Ebony as a shrew who didn't understand his genius. They were divided. And a divided enemy is easier to conquer. I spent the rest of the evening in my room listening to the slamming of doors and the tense silence that followed. I knew Brad wasn't done. He was too desperate to let $10,000 walk away. He needed a fix. He needed a win. I prepared the trap. I took the envelope and placed it conspicuously in my open duffel bag right on top of my clothes. Inside the envelope was a stack of bills. They looked incredibly real at first glance, crisp green with the face of Benjamin Franklin staring back. But they were not legal tender. They were spirit money joss paper I had bought in Chinatown years ago for a cultural showcase at the restaurant. They were meant to be burned as offerings to ancestors. In the faint light, they looked like $10,000. Under a lamp or at a bank teller's window, they were clearly marked Bank of Hell and for ritual use only. I turned off the lights and lay in bed fully clothed, breathing evenly, waiting. It was 2:43 a.m. when the door handle turned. I watched through the slits of my eyes. The hallway light cast a long, thin slice of illumination across the floor. A shadow moved into the room. It was Brad. He was moving quietly, but his breathing was heavy and ragged. He didn't look at me. He went straight for the bag. He knelt down, his hands shaking. I saw him reach in and grab the envelope. He opened it slightly, thumbing the corner of the bills. He saw the green. He saw the 100. He let out a soft, shuddering sigh of relief. He shoved the envelope into the waistband of his pajama pants and crept back toward the door. He didn't look back. He didn't see that my eyes were open, watching him in the dark. He stole from me. He stole from a woman he thought was his destitute sister-in-law. He stole what he thought was her lifeline, her rent money, her food money. He took it without a second of hesitation. I waited until the door clicked shut before I rolled over and smiled into the darkness. Go ahead, Brad. Deposit that money. Hand it to your bookie. Try to spend it. The moment you realize what you are holding, you will know exactly where you are headed. You just stole money from the dead, and tomorrow, the dead are coming to collect. I waited exactly 30 seconds after the door clicked shut before I slid out of bed. I did not need shoes. My socks made no sound on the hardwood floor as I followed the thief down the hallway. I knew exactly where Brad was going. He wasn't going to the bathroom, and he certainly wasn't going back to bed to cuddle with his wife. He was going to the kitchen, the only place in the house where he could turn on a light without waking Ebony. I stopped at the top of the stairs, peering through the banister into the foyer below. A sliver of yellow light spilled out from the kitchen doorway, cutting across the darkness like a warning. I moved down the stairs one careful step at a time. I could hear him muttering to himself a low, frantic stream of self-congratulation. I reached the bottom of the stairs and stood in the shadows of the dining room watching him. Brad was leaning against the granite island, the envelope ripped open on the counter. He was thumbing through the bills, his face illuminated by the under-cabinet lighting. He looked manic. He wasn't looking closely at the currency. He was just seeing the green ink and the numbers counting his salvation. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000. He let out a shaky laugh, shoving the money back into the envelope. He thought he had just stolen my future to pay for his past. I stepped into the light. You know, stealing from family is a new low even for you, Brad. Brad jumped so hard he nearly dropped the envelope. He spun around, clutching the money to his chest like a shield. When he saw it was just me, the panic in his eyes instantly dissolved, replaced by a sneer of pure arrogance. He didn't look ashamed. He didn't try to hide the money. He looked at me with the disdain of a king looking at a peasant who had dared to speak out of turn. I am not stealing, Sophia, he said, his voice smooth and dripping with condescension. I am commandeering assets. This money was wasted on you anyway. What were you going to do with it? Fix a truck that belongs in a junkyard. Buy more oversized hoodies to hide the fact that you have given up on life. I am putting this capital to work. I am saving this family while you play the victim. He took a step toward me, tucking the envelope into his back pocket. The shift in his demeanor was palpable. The money had given him false confidence. He wasn't just the desperate debtor anymore. Now he felt powerful. He felt entitled. And in the dim light of the kitchen, that entitlement took a dark, predatory turn. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my body in a way that made my skin crawl. I was wearing a loose t-shirt and sweatpants, but his gaze felt like a physical violation. He licked his lips, a small wet sound that echoed in the quiet room. "You know," he said, taking another step closer. "You act so high and mighty, Sophia. But we both know what you are. You work in kitchens, you work late nights. I know the type of girls who work in the service industry. You are rough. You are used to getting your hands dirty. You are not like Ebony. Ebony is a princess. But you are a bad girl, aren't you?" I took a step back, my hip bumping against the butcher block counter. "Brad, get out of my way. I am going back to my room." He chuckled, a low, throaty sound. He moved faster than I expected, closing the distance between us. He planted one hand on the counter on my left and the other on my right, trapping me against the wood. The smell of him was overpowering: stale sweat, expensive cologne, and the metallic tang of fear masked by aggression. "Do not play hard to get," he whispered, leaning his face close to mine. "I am doing you a favor, Sophia. I am taking this money, sure, but I can give you something back. Your sister, she is so cold lately, always talking about business, always talking about the house. She doesn't appreciate a real man. But you? I bet you are lonely. I bet you haven't had a man look at you in years." He pressed his body against mine. I could feel the heat radiating off him. It was repulsive. "Get off me," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Come on," he murmured, his hand sliding down to my waist. "You owe me, Sophia. I am letting you stay in this house. I am letting you eat our food. Your sister and you, neither of you wanted to give me the money willingly. So if you are not going to pay me in cash, you are going to pay me in other ways. Consider it rent." He leaned in to kiss my neck, his wet mouth searching for skin. Rage, cold and sharp, flooded my system. He thought I was prey. He thought I was a helpless woman he could corner in the dark. He had forgotten who I was. I wasn't just a cook. I was an executive chef. I had spent 15 years in high-pressure kitchens dominated by men wielding steel every single day. My right hand moved behind me on the counter. My fingers brushed against the wooden block. I didn't need to look. Muscle memory took over. My hand closed around the handle of a Wusthof paring knife, a 3-inch blade of German high-carbon steel that I kept razor-sharp. In one fluid motion, I brought the knife up. I didn't slash. I didn't stab. I simply placed the cold, flat side of the blade directly against his carotid artery right under his jawline. Brad froze. He felt the steel. He stopped breathing. I pressed the blade just hard enough to dent the skin but not break it. His eyes went wide, crossing slightly as he tried to look down at the weapon at his throat. "Back up," I commanded. He scrambled back, his hands flying up in surrender, stumbling over his own feet. He hit the island behind him, panting heavily. I stood my ground, the knife held steady in my hand, my grip professional and relaxed. I looked him dead in the eye. "You think because I work in a kitchen, I am easy?" I asked, my voice calm, almost conversational. "You have no idea what goes on in a professional kitchen, Brad. We work with fire and knives 12 hours a day. We break down whole carcasses before you even wake up in the morning." I took a step toward him, flipping the knife in my hand so the tip pointed directly at his chest. "Touch me again," I whispered, "and I swear to God I will debone you faster than I fillet a salmon. And I won't even leave a scratch on the floor." Brad was trembling now, the lust replaced by sheer terror. He stared at the knife, then at my face. He saw the truth in my eyes. I wasn't bluffing. You, you are crazy, he stammered. You are a psycho. I am a chef, I corrected. And I know exactly where all the major arteries are. Now give me back my money. He reached for his back pocket, but before he could pull out the envelope, the kitchen lights flooded on, blinding us both. What the hell is going on in here? We both snapped our heads toward the doorway. Ebony stood there wrapped in a silk robe, her face a mask of shock and fury. She looked at Brad, breathless and pressed against the island. She looked at me, holding a knife, but she didn't see a woman defending herself. She saw what she wanted to see. She saw her husband and her sister alone in the dark, breathing heavy with sexual tension thick in the air. Sophia Ebony shrieked, "What are you doing with my husband?" Brad, sensing a lifeline, immediately switched scripts. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "Ebony, thank God you are here. She came on to me. I came down for a glass of water and she cornered me. She tried to kiss me, and when I pushed her away, she pulled a knife. She is insane. She is trying to force me to sleep with her to get the house back." My jaw tightened. The lie was so absurd, so vile that for a second I was speechless. I looked at Ebony, waiting for her to see reason. Waiting for her to realize that her husband was a gambling addict who had just stolen from me. But Ebony didn't look at Brad. She marched right up to me, her eyes burning with hate. "I knew it," she spat. "I knew you were trash. You have been jealous of me my whole life. You want my life. You want my house. And now you want my husband. You dirty, desperate tramp." She looked at the knife in my hand. "Put that down before I call the police." I lowered the knife slowly, placing it back on the counter. I looked from Brad, who was smirking behind her back, to Ebony, who was vibrating with misplaced rage. "He has my money in his pocket, Ebony," I said quietly. "He stole it. And he tried to assault me. Liar." Ebony screamed. "Brad doesn't need your pathetic lottery money, and he certainly doesn't need you. Look at you. Who would want to touch you? You smell like grease and desperation." She grabbed Brad's arm, pulling him toward the door. "Come on, Brad. We are going upstairs. Lock your door. God knows what this animal will do next." Brad let her lead him away, casting one last triumphant look over his shoulder at me. He had the money. He had his wife on his side. He thought he had won. I stood alone in the kitchen, the silence rushing back in. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I picked up the paring knife and calmly washed it in the sink, drying it with a towel. Let them think I am the villain. Let Ebony believe her husband is a saint. It only made the fall that was coming tomorrow so much sweeter. Brad had the fake money, Ebony had the fake narrative, and I had the knife. The stage was set. The funeral was in 6 hours, and I was going to serve a dish cold enough to freeze hell over. The Tuesday morning sun rose over Atlanta with a humid, oppressive weight, the kind of heat that sticks your shirt to your back the moment you step outside. It was a fitting atmosphere for the circus that was about to unfold. I stood in front of the mirror in the guest bathroom of my childhood home, adjusting the collar of a simple black dress I had bought at a thrift store 2 days ago. It was modest, faded and frayed at the hem. It was the uniform of the poor relation, the sister who had failed to launch. I pulled my hair back into a severe, messy bun and scrubbed my face clean of any makeup, letting the dark circles under my eyes stand out. I looked exhausted. I looked defeated. I looked exactly like the victim my sister and her husband needed me to be. Downstairs, I could hear the commotion of the main event beginning. The house was buzzing with activity, not the somber quiet of mourning, but the frantic energy of a stage production before the curtain rises. I walked down the stairs, keeping my head low. The front door was open, and a stream of florists were carrying in wreaths that cost more than my first car. Lilies. Thousands of them. The scent was overpowering, choking the air with a sickly sweet perfume that barely masked the smell of greed. I walked out to the driveway just as the limousine pulled up. It was a stretch Hummer, black and obnoxious, blocking the entire street. And then she emerged. Ebony stepped out of the house like she was walking a runway in Milan. I had to physically bite my tongue to keep from laughing. She was wearing a vintage Chanel skirt suit, black tweed with gold buttons, paired with a fascinator hat, with a black veil that covered her eyes. It was stunning. It was elegant. And I knew exactly where it came from. I had received the notification on my mother's secure banking app 3 days ago. A $5,000 charge at the Chanel boutique in Lenox Square. She had bought her funeral outfit with the credit card of the woman she was burying. She was holding a lace handkerchief dabbing at dry eyes. Behind her, Brad adjusted his tie. He was wearing a new suit too likely charged to the same account. He looked less like a grieving son-in-law and more like a candidate running for office. He checked his watch, then his phone, then his watch again. He was counting down the hours until the wire transfer. We drove to the church in a convoy. I was not invited into the limo. I followed behind an old Betsy, my rusted truck rattling and coughing, creating a plume of black smoke that seemed to offend the pristine luxury of the funeral procession. We arrived at the church, a massive historic building with stained glass windows that had seen generations of Atlanta's elite. Today, however, it felt less like a house of God and more like a boardroom. The parking lot was full of luxury sedans, Mercedes, BMWs, Lexuses. I parked my truck in the far back corner between a dumpster and a hedges, trying to make myself invisible. As I walked toward the entrance, I saw the crowd. There were easily 200 people milling about on the steps. I scanned the faces. I saw maybe 5 people who actually knew my mother. The rest were strangers. They were men in sharp suits talking on cell phones. They were women in designer sunglasses checking their makeup in compact mirrors. And then there were the others. Scattered through the crowd were 3 women dressed in exaggerated black mourning weeds, wailing loudly. One of them threw her hands up toward the sky, crying out, "Why, Lord, why?" I stopped in my tracks. I had never seen this woman in my life. My mother didn't know her. Ebony had hired professional mourners. She had actually paid strangers to create a spectacle of grief because she knew her own tears wouldn't be convincing enough. It was grotesque. It was a performance art piece on narcissism. I made my way to the sanctuary doors. A large man in a suit with an earpiece stopped me. He looked at my dress, my scuffed shoes, and my messy hair. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice flat. "The front pews are reserved for immediate family and VIP guests. General seating is in the back or the balcony." "I am immediate family," I said quietly. "I am her daughter. Sophia." The usher looked down at a clipboard. He ran his finger down a list. I saw the names: Ebony, Brad, then a list of Brad's business partners. My name was not in the VIP section. It was listed at the very bottom under general admission. "I am sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. Mrs. Ebony gave strict instructions. "The front is for those participating in the service. You are listed for row 40. Row 40. The very last row, right next to the exit doors." Ebony had physically marginalized me, pushing me as far away from the pulpit and the truth as possible. She wanted me invisible. She wanted me silent. I nodded, bowing my head. "I understand," I whispered. "I will sit in the back." I walked down the long aisle, feeling the eyes of the crowd on me. They weren't looking at me with sympathy. They were looking at me with judgment. I could hear the whispers. "That is the other sister, the one who didn't make anything of herself. Look at her shoes, disgraceful." I reached the back row and sat down on the hard wooden pew. From here, I had a panoramic view of the deception. The sanctuary filled up quickly. Brad was working the room like it was a networking mixer. I watched him shake hands with a man I recognized as a local real estate developer. Brad leaned in, whispering something, then patted his breast pocket, the pocket where he kept his phone, and likely the fake waiver I had signed. He was closing the deal. He was probably promising the developer that the demolition crews could start on Wednesday. He laughed at something the man said, a little too loud for a funeral, then quickly composed himself into a mask of solemnity when he noticed the pastor watching. Ebony sat in the front row center seat. She was flanked by the hired wailers who were now humming a low, mournful tune. On the pedestal in front of the altar sat a golden urn. It was shiny, gaudy, and completely empty. Or perhaps it contained the ashes from the fireplace, as I had joked to myself earlier. The absurdity of weeping over a jar of soot, while the living woman sat in a hotel room 5 miles away, was almost too much to bear. I placed my oversized purse on the pew next to me. Inside, concealed beneath a scarf, was my iPad. It was already connected to the church's audiovisual system. I had spent an hour 2 nights ago hacking into their Bluetooth network, which still used the factory default password. The password was literally admin. People who underestimate security deserve what they get, just like people who underestimate their quiet, obedient sisters. The organ music swelled a deep, resonant chord that vibrated in my chest. The chatter died down. The heavy oak doors at the back of the church were pulled shut, sealing us in. The air was cool, conditioned, and smelled of lilies and lies. I watched Brad sit down next to Ebony. He put his arm around her, whispering in her ear. From the back, it looked like a gesture of comfort. But knowing Brad, he was probably whispering, "Is the wire set up? Did you confirm the routing number?" Ebony nodded, leaning her head on his shoulder. They looked like the perfect couple. The grieving daughter and the supportive husband. The victors. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. My heart was beating slow and rhythmic like a war drum. I opened my encrypted messaging app. I tapped on the contact saved as the Queen. I looked up one last time at the golden urn, then at the backs of the heads of the people who had come to feast on my mother's legacy. They thought this was the end of the story. They thought they were witnessing the final chapter of Viola Davis. They had no idea they were sitting in the splash zone. I looked down at my screen and typed a single word. Showtime. I hit send. I saw the 3 dots appear on the screen as the message was delivered. Then a thumbs up emoji appeared in response. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and sat back, crossing my legs. The pastor stepped up to the pulpit, adjusting his glasses. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice booming. "We are gathered here today to mourn the passing of a pillar of our community." I smiled. "No, pastor. We are gathered here for an execution, and the first head is about to roll." The pastor stepped aside, his face a mask of practiced solemnity, and gestured for Ebony to take the stage. The organ music faded into a soft, mournful hum. My sister stood up from the front pew, smoothing the skirt of her Chanel suit. She took a moment to compose herself, dabbing at her dry eyes with the lace handkerchief she had purchased with stolen money. She walked up the steps to the pulpit with the grace of a grieving angel, but I knew better. I was watching a predator ascend to its perch. The sanctuary fell silent. Every eye was fixed on her. She gripped the sides of the wooden podium, looking out at the sea of faces, and let out a shaky, shuddering breath that was amplified by the microphone. It was a masterclass in manipulation. My mother was a saint. Ebony began, her voice trembling just enough to sound heartbroken, but clear enough to be heard in the back row. She was the light of this family. And these past few weeks, they have been the hardest of my life. I sat in the back row, my hands folded in my lap, feeling a cold rage settle in my chest. I watched as she spun a web of lies so thick it threatened to suffocate everyone in the room. I remember the nights at the hospital. Ebony continued looking up toward the stained glass ceiling. I remember sitting by her bedside, holding her hand as the machines beeped. I remember wiping her brow when the fever took her. I was exhausted. I was terrified. But I could not leave her side. I promised her I would be there until the very end. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth ached. Hospital Mom hadn't been in a hospital in 5 years. While Ebony claimed to be wiping Mom's brow, she was actually posting photos of her brunch in Paris on Instagram. While she claimed to be holding Mom's hand, she was ignoring my calls asking for help with the medical bills I was paying out of my own pocket. The audacity was breathtaking. She was rewriting history in real time, painting herself as the martyr and the savior, erasing every sacrifice I had ever made. She talked for 10 minutes. She told stories that never happened. She described conversations that never took place. She even stole a memory of mine the time Mom taught me to make her signature peach cobbler, and claimed it was her memory, saying Mom had passed the secret recipe down to her on her deathbed. The irony was that Ebony couldn't boil water without burning it, and the recipe she was talking about was currently sitting in the cookbook she had tossed into the back seat of my truck. Then came the pivot. I saw Brad sit up straighter in the front pew. This was the moment they had been waiting for. This was the cash grab. But Mom did not want us to dwell on sadness, Ebony said, her voice gaining strength. She wanted to leave a legacy. She wanted to help others. That is why, in accordance with her final wishes, Brad and I have established the Viola Davis Memorial Foundation. Brad stood up on cue holding a large poster board with a QR code and banking information printed on it. He placed it on an easel next to the empty urn. "We are asking that in lieu of flowers you donate to this fund," Ebony announced. "All proceeds will go toward helping elderly women with heart conditions. It is what Mom would have wanted." I pulled out my phone, keeping it low. I scanned the QR code with my camera. It didn't take me to a registered 501c3 charity page. It redirected to a private holding account. I recognized the routing number immediately. It was a shell account in the Cayman Islands. I had seen the paperwork for it on Brad's laptop when I hacked his email 2 days ago. They weren't collecting money for charity. They were funneling donations from our friends and neighbors directly into Brad's escape fund. They were robbing the mourners at a fake funeral. Ebony wasn't finished, though. She had secured the money, now she needed to secure her status. She needed to destroy me one last time to ensure no one would believe me if I ever tried to speak up. She looked down at the front row, then slowly lifted her gaze until she found me sitting in the shadows of the back pew. The spotlight hit her face, illuminating the smug satisfaction in her eyes. "You know family is complicated," she sighed into the microphone. "We all make choices. I chose to stay. I chose to care for my mother. But not everyone has that strength." The crowd turned, heads swiveled in the pews. Hundreds of eyes landed on me. I felt the weight of their judgment. "My sister Sophia is here today," Ebony said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "She is sitting in the back, and I want you all to know, I do not blame her. Mom did not blame her. Even though Sophia was not there at the end, even though she could not contribute financially or emotionally to Mom's care, even though she chose to distance herself while I carried the burden, Mom forgave her." She paused for dramatic effect. The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear the whispers. Ungrateful. Cold. How could she? And so do I. Ebony continued, looking directly at me with a smile that was pure venom. "Sophia, I forgive you for abandoning us. I forgive you for your failures. You are still my sister. And even though you have nothing to offer this family, we will always pray for you." It was the perfect assassination. She had painted me as the prodigal failure and herself as the benevolent saint. If I stayed silent, I accepted the narrative. If I screamed, I looked like the crazy, jealous sister she had warned everyone about. But I wasn't going to scream, and I wasn't going to stay silent. I reached into my purse and wrapped my hand around the cold metal of the wireless microphone I had paired with the church's sound system 10 minutes ago. I stood up. The movement caught the attention of the people in the back rows. They shifted, looking at me with curiosity. I didn't walk toward the front. I didn't need to. I just stood there, tall and calm in my frayed black dress. I flipped the switch on the microphone. A sharp squeal of feedback cut through the air, causing everyone to wince. The sound system crackled as my frequency overrode the pulpit mic. Ebony jumped back, looking confused. She tapped her microphone, thinking it was a technical glitch. I held my microphone up to my lips. My voice boomed through the sanctuary speakers louder and clearer than hers. "You speak beautifully, sister," I said. The entire church gasped. Ebony's head snapped up. Brad spun around in his seat, his eyes wide with panic. The pastor looked around frantically, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Sophia Ebony hissed, her voice barely audible over the main speakers now that I had hijacked the channel. "Sit down, you are embarrassing yourself." I took a step into the aisle. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked straight at her. "You have a wonderful memory, Ebony," I continued, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You remember the hospital. You remember the last breath. You remember the peach cobbler recipe." I started walking slowly down the center aisle. The sea of people parted for me, their faces a mixture of shock and anticipation. "But you forgot one thing," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming deadly serious. "You forgot that while you can fake a tear and you can fake a will and you can certainly fake a charity fund, you cannot fake the truth forever." I stopped 10 rows from the front. I was close enough now to see the sweat breaking out on Brad's forehead. I was close enough to see the fear behind Ebony's veil. "You said Mom forgave me," I said. "That is very generous of her, considering she is the one who told me what you did." Ebony laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "She is grief-stricken," she told the crowd. "She is hallucinating. Someone get her out of here." Brad jumped up, signaling to the ushers. "Get her! She is ruining the service." Two large men started moving toward me from the side aisles. I didn't flinch. I just raised my voice, letting it thunder through the church. "You claim you heard her last words, Ebony, but I think you are confused, because the dead cannot lie." I looked up at the choir loft where the projection screen was lowered. "But the living," I said, pointing at her, "certainly can. And unfortunately for you, the person you are burying today has a lot to say." I pressed the button on my phone in my pocket. The lights in the sanctuary dimmed. The giant screen behind Ebony flickered to life. And the gasps that followed were not of surprise. They were of pure, unadulterated horror. The massive projection screen descended from the ceiling behind the pulpit, moving with a slow mechanical hum that seemed deafening in the silent church. Ebony turned around, her face, a mask of confusion that quickly morphed into terror as the white canvas locked into place. I stood in the aisle, my thumb hovering over the play button on my phone screen. I did not look at my sister. I looked at the hundreds of people who had come here to mourn a woman they barely knew, a woman whose memory was being desecrated for profit. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment. This was not just revenge, this was an exorcism. I pressed the button. The church speakers, which had just amplified Ebony's tearful eulogy, crackled with a sudden sharp burst of static. Then a voice filled the room. It was not the voice of God. It was the voice of Brad. The audio quality was crystal clear, captured by the high-fidelity bugs I had planted in their bedroom. "Is she dead yet?" Brad's voice boomed through the sanctuary, dripping with impatience and cruelty. The sound was so loud it rattled the stained glass windows. "I have the realtor breathing down my neck, Ebony. If that damn old lady does not die by Tuesday, we lose the deal. Why is she holding on? She is useless. She is just a vegetable draining our bank account." The gasps from the congregation were immediate and visceral. A woman in the second row covered her mouth with a gloved hand. The pastor's jaw dropped, but the audio kept playing. Ebony's voice answered him on the recording, sounding bored and irritated. "Stop whining, Brad. I handled it. Dr. Sterling is on board. Nature just needs a little push. Once she is gone, we get the insurance payout and the house. Just make sure you do not screw up the wire transfer." Brad stood up in the front pew, his face draining of all color. He looked like a ghost. He waved his hands frantically at the sound booth in the balcony. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Turn it off! It is a fake! It is AI! She generated it." But the sound technician was not at the controls. I had locked the booth remotely, and I wasn't done. On the giant screen, the image shifted. It was no longer a blank white square. It was a high-definition video. The timestamp in the corner read 2 days ago. The location was unmistakably the office of Dr. Marcus Sterling at Sunny Meadows. The lighting was harsh and fluorescent, illuminating every pore on their faces. The video showed Ebony sitting across from the doctor. She was not crying. She was not grieving. She was smiling. She looked radiant, in fact. She was holding a pen hovering over a document that was clearly marked Certificate of Death. So Dr. Sterling said on the screen, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. The time of death is recorded as 7:42 p.m. Cause of death myocardial infarction. Clean. Simple. No autopsy required. Ebony laughed. It was a sound that chilled the blood of everyone in the church. It was a cackle of pure, unadulterated greed. She signed the paper with a flourish, dotting the I in her name, with a little heart. Thank God, the video, Ebony said, tossing the pen onto the desk. I thought she would never go. Do you know how much debt we are in, Marcus? This piece of paper is my freedom. Ding dong, the witch is dead. On screen, she high-fived the doctor. Real-time, Ebony let out a shriek that sounded like a wounded animal. She lunged toward the screen as if she could physically tear the image down. No, that is not real. That is a deep fake. She is framing me. But the damage was done. The visual evidence was undeniable. The way she laughed, the way she looked at the death certificate like it was a winning lottery ticket, it was too specific, too raw to be manufactured. The sanctuary erupted into chaos. It wasn't the polite murmuring of a scandalized crowd. It was an uproar. People were standing up, pointing, shouting. The professional mourners Ebony had hired stopped wailing and looked at each other, confused about whether they should keep acting or ask for their checks. I watched the fallout with cold detachment. I saw the real estate developer, the man Brad had been whispering to just minutes ago, stand up abruptly. He looked at Brad with a mixture of disgust and professional horror. He didn't say a word. He just buttoned his jacket, shook his head, and walked briskly toward the exit. He was followed by 3 other men in suits, Brad's investors. Brad saw them leaving. He tried to run after them, stumbling over the legs of the people in the pew. Wait, Mike John. Listen to me. It is a misunderstanding. She is crazy. Do not leave. We have a deal. One of the men turned back, his voice cutting through the noise. We do not do business with frauds, Brad. Lose my number. Brad collapsed against the wall, watching his financial salvation walk out the door. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a murderous rage, but he was powerless. He was drowning, and I was the one holding the hose. Ebony was having a meltdown at the altar. She was grabbing the microphone stand, shaking it, screaming at the pastor to do something. You let her do this. You are in on it. I will sue this church. I will sue everyone. The pastor stepped back from her, looking at her as if she were possessed. Mrs. Davis. Please, he stammered. Please respect the house of God. Respect. Ebony screamed, her voice shredding. I paid for this service. I paid for these flowers. I own this funeral. I walked forward. I moved slowly, deliberately down the center aisle. The crowd parted for me, not out of judgment this time, but out of fear and awe. I was the angel of vengeance, and I had the floor. I walked right up to the altar, past the sobbing, screaming mess that was my sister, past the defeated heap that was my brother-in-law. I stopped in front of the golden urn. It sat there on its velvet pedestal, gleaming under the lights, the centerpiece of their great deception. I reached out and placed my hand on the cold metal of the urn. Ebony stopped screaming. She stared at me, her chest heaving. Get your hands off that, she hissed. Do not touch her. You have no right. I looked at her. I looked deep into her eyes, seeing the fear behind the madness. She knew the game was over, but she was still trying to bluff her way through the final hand. You kept asking why I did not cry, Ebony, I said, my voice magnified by the microphone I was still holding. You told everyone I was cold. You told everyone I abandoned Mom. I tapped the lid of the urn. It made a hollow metallic ring. But there is a reason I am not crying over this urn, sister. I unscrewed the lid. The threads ground together with a harsh scratching sound. Ebony lunged forward to stop me, but the large security guard, the one who had tried to stop me earlier, stepped in her way. He had seen enough. He crossed his arms, blocking her path. I lifted the lid. I tilted the urn forward so the front row could see the contents. Inside was a pile of gray, gritty dust. It looked like ash, but it smelled like charred oak and newspaper. "You paid $3,000 for this urn," I said. "And you paid Dr. Sterling $5,000 for the death certificate. But you really should have checked the contents before you put on this show." I reached into the urn and pulled out a small, half-burnt piece of paper that was mixed in with the ash. I held it up. It was a corner of a Domino's pizza coupon. "You asked where Mom is," I said, looking at the stunned congregation. "She is not in this jar. This is ash from my fireplace in Chicago. I scooped it out before I drove down here." I dropped the coupon back into the urn and dusted off my hands. "Mom is not dead, Ebony. She is watching this entire funeral via live stream from a hotel room in downtown Atlanta. And I think she has seen enough." I turned to the back of the church and pointed at the heavy oak doors. "Open the doors," I commanded. The doors swung open, flooding the sanctuary with blinding daylight. And there, silhouetted against the sun, stood a figure in a bright red suit, very much alive and very, very angry. The heavy oak doors of the church did not just open, they burst outward as if pushed by the hand of divine judgment itself. A blinding column of midday Georgia sunlight flooded into the dim sanctuary, cutting through the stale air and the scent of expensive lilies. The congregation shielded their eyes, squinting against the sudden glare. For a moment, all anyone could see was a silhouette framed in the doorway. It was not a ghost. It was not a spirit rising from the grave. It was a woman of flesh and blood, standing tall and unyielding. My mother, Viola Davis, stepped across the threshold. She was not wearing the hospital gown Ebony had described in her lies, nor was she the frail, confused, elderly woman Brad had mocked in his recordings. She was wearing a blood-red power suit that was tailored to perfection, the color of rage and vitality. Her hair was done up in an elegant twist, and she wore gold jewelry that caught the light, sending sparkles dancing across the terrified faces of her family. She did not walk with a cane. She walked with the purposeful stride of a general entering a battlefield to execute traitors. Flanking her on the left was Mr. Henderson, our family attorney, clutching a thick black briefcase. On her right walked the chief of the Atlanta Police Department, his badge gleaming on his chest, followed closely by 4 uniformed officers. The sound of their footsteps on the marble floor of the foyer echoed like gunshots, click-clack, click-clack, the rhythm of impending doom. The silence in the church was absolute. No one breathed, no one moved. Even the air conditioning seemed to pause in reverence. The only sound was the steady approach of the woman who was supposed to be in the urn. I watched Ebony from my vantage point in the aisle. Her face had gone from a mask of fury to a sheet of pure white terror. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish pulled from the water, gasping for oxygen that was no longer there. She gripped the pulpit so hard, her knuckles turned blue. She was watching her nightmare walk toward her in high heels. Viola did not look at the crowd. She did not look at me. Her eyes were locked on her eldest daughter, the golden child, who had tried to bury her alive. Mom walked down the center aisle, passing the rows of stunned onlookers. As she passed the pews, people actually shrank back, pressing themselves against the wood, as if afraid that her righteous anger might burn them if they got too close. She reached the front of the church. She walked up the 3 steps to the altar platform. She stood toe-to-toe with Ebony. The height difference was negligible, but in that moment my mother looked 10 feet tall, while Ebony looked like a shrinking child. "Mom," Ebony whispered, her voice barely a squeak. "Mom, is that you?" My mother did not answer with words. Not yet. She drew her hand back slowly, deliberately, giving Ebony a split second to realize what was coming. Then she swung. The sound of the slap was louder than the organ music had been. It was a sharp, cracking thunderclap that seemed to freeze time. Ebony's head snapped to the side with violent force. Her expensive fascinator hat went flying off her head, tumbling down the steps to land at the feet of the security guard. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. My mother grabbed Ebony by the chin, forcing her to look her in the eye. "You thought I was dead?" Mom asked, her voice low and dangerous, magnified by the microphone Ebony was still standing near. "You told these people I was dead, Mom. I can explain." Ebony stammered, tears of genuine pain streaming down her face, now mixed with the ruin of her makeup. "I thought—" Dr. Sterling said. "Dr. Sterling is in handcuffs right now." Mom cut her off. "And you are next. I am not dead yet, little girl, but you have already sold my house. You have already looted my jewelry box. You have already spent my retirement money to buy that ridiculous suit you are wearing." Mom released her chin with a shove, causing Ebony to stumble back against the pulpit. "Did you think I would not find out?" Mom demanded, her voice rising, filling the sanctuary with the power of a matriarch scorned. "Did you think you could erase 50 years of my life with a fake piece of paper and a pizza coupon in a jar? You are not grieving me, Ebony. You are grieving the money you are never going to touch. You are taking my life savings to pay for your husband's mistakes." At the mention of her husband, Ebony's eyes darted to the front pew, but the seat was empty. Brad had taken advantage of the shock of the slap to make his move. He was crouched low, scurrying like a rat toward the side exit near the choir loft. He was trying to slip out the fire door, hoping to disappear into the parking lot and drive away in his leased BMW before the reality of his crimes caught up with him. He pushed the crash bar on the door, throwing his shoulder against it. The door flew open. But instead of freedom, Brad found himself staring into the chests of two large police officers who were waiting just outside. They had secured the perimeter 10 minutes ago. "Going somewhere, Mr. Davis?" the chief of police boomed from the center aisle. Brad stumbled back into the sanctuary, his hands raised in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "No, I was just getting some air. My heart. I feel faint." "Save the acting for the jury," the chief said, signaling his men. The officers marched into the church, grabbing Brad by the arms. They dragged him to the center of the room, forcing him to kneel right in front of the altar, right in front of the woman he had wished dead. Ebony, seeing her husband in custody, let out a wail of despair. "Mom, please." "It was him. It was all Brad. He made me do it. He owes money to bad people, Mom. They were going to hurt us. I had to do it." My mother looked down at her daughter with eyes that were no longer angry, but filled with a profound, icy disappointment. That was the worst part. Anger implies passion. Disappointment implies that you are no longer worth the energy of emotion. "You did not have to do anything," Mom said quietly. "You could have come to me. You could have asked for help. But you chose to kill me instead. You chose greed over blood." Mr. Henderson stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a stack of documents stamped with the official seal of the Fulton County District Attorney. He handed them to the police chief. Ebony Davis and Bradley Davis, the chief, announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room, ensuring every witness heard the charges. "You are hereby under arrest." "For what?" Ebony shrieked, clinging to the pulpit. "This is a family matter." The chief began to read from the warrant, and the list was long and devastating. Count 1, conspiracy to commit murder. Count 2, insurance fraud in the first degree. Count 3, forgery of medical documents. Count 4, wire fraud. Count 5, elder abuse and financial exploitation. The officers moved in on Ebony. They pulled her hands behind her back. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the final note in her symphony of lies. It was a cold, mechanical sound that signaled the end of her life as she knew it. Brad was crying now, sobbing openly on the floor, snot running down his face. "I am sorry, Viola. I am sorry. I have a gambling problem. I need help." My mother looked down at him. "You do need help, Brad. And you will get it. The state penitentiary has excellent programs for people who like to dig holes they cannot climb out of." The police hauled them up. Ebony was thrashing, trying to kick the officers, screaming about her rights, screaming about her status. My Chanel. You are ruining my Chanel, she yelled as they dragged her down the steps. As they were led past me down the center aisle towards the waiting squad cars, Ebony locked eyes with me one last time. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You! She screamed, spitting in my direction. You did this! You witch! You ruined everything! I stood calm and still watching her get dragged away. I did not yell back. I did not gloat. I simply raised my hand and gave her a small, polite wave. The same wave you give to a guest who has overstayed their welcome. I did not ruin anything, sister, I said softly, though she could not hear me over her own screaming. I just turned on the lights. The church was silent again, save for the distant sound of sirens. My mother stood at the altar alone. She looked tired. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the heavy weight of a mother who had just sent her child to prison. She looked at the empty urn. Then she looked at me. We locked eyes across the distance. There was no need for words. We had won. But as the police lights flashed red and blue through the open doors, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, I knew that the cleanup was just beginning. The war was over, but the battlefield was covered in the wreckage of a family that had been built on a foundation of sand. And I was the only one left standing with a shovel ready to bury the past for good. The fluorescent lights of the precinct interrogation room hummed with a low, maddening buzz that seemed to drill directly into the skull. It was a stark contrast to the orchestrated lighting of the church, but for my sister and her husband, it was the spotlight they finally deserved. I stood behind the one-way mirror in the observation room, standing shoulder to shoulder with my mother and Detective Miller. We watched the feeds from two separate rooms. On the left monitor was Brad. On the right was Ebony. They had been separated the moment they were shoved into the squad cars, and the isolation was already tearing them apart. In room A, Brad was a puddle of sweat and nervous tics. He had loosened his tie and was pacing the small metal cage like a trapped rat. He did not wait for his lawyer. He did not wait for a deal. He started talking the moment the detective offered him a cup of lukewarm water. He was desperate not just to stay out of prison, but ironically to stay inside it. It was her idea, Brad blurted out, slamming his hand on the metal table. His voice cracked through the speaker system. Ebony set it up. She knew the medical terminology. She knew Dr. Sterling from college. I just went along with it because I love my wife. You have to believe me. I am a victim here. She is manipulative. She threatened to leave me if I did not help her secure the house. Detective Miller leaned into the microphone. But you were the one pushing the sale, Brad. We have the audio. You were the one talking to the cash buyer. Brad crumbled, dropping his head into his hands. He began to weep, but they were not tears of remorse. They were tears of terror. You do not understand, he sobbed. I owe money to the wrong people. I owe $800,000 to a bookie named Rocco in Atlantic City. He told me if I did not have the cash by Tuesday, he was going to send a crew to break my legs and then burn down whatever house I was living in. I watched my mother's face as she listened. She did not look surprised. She just shook her head slowly. So he was going to sell my home to pay off a gambling debt and then likely get us all killed when the money ran out anyway, she whispered. On the screen, Brad looked up at the camera, his eyes wild. Please, officer, you have to keep me in custody. Do not let me out on bail. If I walk out those doors, Rocco will find me. I am safer in a cell. I will tell you everything. I will testify against Ebony. Just do not let me go. It was pathetic. The man who had strutted around my mother's house wearing my father's watch was now begging to be incarcerated for his own protection. He had gambled his life away and lost. We turned our attention to the monitor for room B. Ebony was handling the pressure differently. She sat rigid in her chair, her ruined Chanel suit still stained with sweat and tears. She was fixing her hair in the reflection of the two-way mirror, unaware that we were watching her every move. She was rehearsing. I could see her lips moving, practicing her expressions, trying to find the perfect angle of victimhood. When the door opened and Detective Miller walked in, she immediately burst into tears. It was a flawless performance. I want to see my mother, she wailed. Please, I need to explain. Brad forced me into this. He is abusive. I was scared for my life. I only signed those papers because I was terrified of what he would do to Mom if I didn't. I was trying to protect her. My mother stiffened beside me. She reached for the door handle of the interrogation room. Are you sure, Mrs. Davis? The detective asked. You do not have to go in there. I need to finish this, Viola said, her voice like steel. We walked into the room together. When Ebony saw Mom, she let out a gasp of relief. She stood up, reaching out her handcuffed hands as if expecting a hug. Mom, oh, thank God. Tell them to let me go. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I was so lost without you. I made a mistake, Mom, a terrible mistake. But I am your daughter. I am your Ebony. She looked at me standing behind Mom, and her eyes narrowed for a second before she masked it. And Sophia. Sophia can tell you, I was under so much stress, I just wanted what was best for the family. Mom did not hug her. She did not sit down. She stood on the other side of the metal table looking down at the daughter she had raised, the daughter she had put through private school, the daughter she had loved with every fiber of her being. Sit down, Ebony, Mom commanded. Ebony sat confused by the coldness. Mom, you say you were protecting me. Mom asked, her voice deceptively calm. You say Brad forced you? Yes, Ebony cried. He is a monster, Mom. I am a victim. Mom reached into her purse. She did not pull out a tissue. She pulled out a thick, weathered file folder. It was old. The edges were yellowed with age. She tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud between them. Do you know what this is? Mom asked. Ebony looked at the folder. She shook her head. No. What is it? This is your father's medical file from the night he died 10 years ago, Mom said. The room went deadly silent. I felt a chill run down my spine. I remembered that night. I was 22. Dad had been in a coma after a stroke. We were told there was no brain activity. We were told it was time to let go. For 10 years I have kept this hidden. Mom continued, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. Because I did not want to believe it. I wanted to believe that my daughter was compassionate. I wanted to believe that you loved your father. What are you talking about? Ebony whispered, her face draining of color. I am talking about the DNR order, Mom said. The do not resuscitate order. The doctor told me that Dad had signed it weeks before the stroke. He showed me the signature. But I knew your father. He was a fighter. He wanted to live to see his grandchildren. Mom opened the folder, revealing a document signed in blue ink. I had the signature analyzed 3 years ago, Mom said. It was a forgery, Ebony, just like the death certificate you signed yesterday, just like the will you tried to pass off this morning. Ebony stopped breathing. She stared at the paper, unable to look away. You forged your dying father's signature to turn off his life support, Mom whispered, tears finally spilling from her eyes. You killed him. And you did it because the trust fund stipulated that you only got your payout upon his death. You wanted a new Mercedes and a condo in Midtown, so you pulled the plug on the man who taught you how to ride a bike. No, Ebony gasped, shaking her head violently. No, that is not true. I was just... He was suffering. He was recovering. Mom screamed, slamming her hand on the table. The doctor said he was showing signs of improvement. But you rushed it. You pressured the hospital. You killed him, Ebony. I stood frozen in the corner, my entire world tilted on its axis. I had always thought Dad's death was natural. I had grieved him thinking it was his time. But it wasn't. My sister had murdered our father for money just like she had tried to murder our mother. She wasn't just greedy, she was a sociopath. I have forgiven you for a lot of things, Mom said, her voice dropping back to a terrifying whisper. I forgave you for bullying Sophia. I forgave you for stealing from my purse when you were a teenager. But this... Mom leaned in close, her face inches from Ebony's. I do not have a daughter named Ebony. She died the night my husband did. You are just a stranger to me. A stranger who is going to spend the rest of her life in a cage where you cannot hurt anyone else. Mom turned around and walked to the door. She did not look back. "Mom, no, don't leave me!" Ebony screamed, struggling against her handcuffs. "Mom, please, I am sorry. I will fix it." Mom walked out of the room, leaving the heavy metal door open. Ebony was sobbing, putting her head on the table, wailing like a banshee. She was broken. She was exposed. She was alone. I did not leave with Mom. I stayed. I walked over to the table and stood where my mother had stood. Ebony looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. She saw me standing there in my thrift store dress, and for a second she tried to rally. She tried to find that old superiority. "Are you happy now?" she hissed through her teeth. "You finally won. You turned her against me. I hope you enjoy counting your pennies, Sophia. You are still nothing. You are still just the help." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life I did not feel anger. I felt pity. I reached into my purse and pulled out a business card. It was thick, heavy cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. It did not say "Line Cook." It said "Sophia Davis, owner and executive chef, the Obsidian Group." I placed the card on the table next to the evidence of her crimes. "I am not the help, Ebony," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I am the one who just bought your husband's debt from Rocco." Ebony stared at the card, her mouth falling open. "That is right," I said, leaning in. "I own the debt, which means I own Brad. And since you signed that joint liability clause on your marriage license, I own you too. The lawyers will be in touch to liquidate your assets, your car, your clothes, even that fake Chanel suit you are wearing. It all belongs to me now." I turned and walked toward the door. "Enjoy prison, sister," I called back over my shoulder. "I hear the kitchen duty is brutal. Maybe you can finally learn how to cook." I walked out of the interrogation room and heard the guttural scream of a woman who had lost absolutely everything echoing down the hallway. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. The slate was wiped clean. The revenge was complete. Now it was time to live. The heavy metal doors of the interrogation room clicked shut, sealing away the screaming remnants of my sister and her husband. But the business of the day was not quite finished. Mr. Henderson sat in the quiet conference room of the precinct, arranging a stack of documents on the table with the precision of a surgeon. My mother sat beside him, her face pale but composed, the red suit she wore now seeming like armor that had successfully deflected a fatal blow. She looked at me with a mixture of exhaustion and new curiosity, as if she was seeing her youngest daughter for the first time. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and opened the file I had given him earlier. He looked at my mother and smiled, a rare, genuine expression that softened his sharp features. "Viola, there is one more matter we need to settle regarding the estate and the future of the house. As you know, the property is now valued at nearly $5 million due to the commercial rezoning." Mom nodded slowly, reaching for her water glass. "I know, Arthur. And without Ebony or Brad to manage it, I suppose I should just sell it. It is too much house for one woman. I do not want the memories of what happened there to haunt me." "You do not have to sell it to a stranger." "Mom," I said, stepping forward from the corner of the room. Mr. Henderson slid a contract across the table. "Sophia has made a formal offer, Viola. She wants to purchase the property from you, full market value, $5 million, cash." Mom dropped her glass. It didn't break, but water spilled onto the table, a small puddle spreading like her disbelief. She looked from the lawyer to me, her eyes wide. "Sophia, what are you talking about? $5 million, you are a chef. I know you work hard, baby, but—" I sat down across from her, taking her trembling hands in mine. "Mom, I am not just a chef. Do you remember the restaurant Brad applied to last year? The high-end steakhouse downtown? The Obsidian?" He wouldn't shut up about how he was perfect for the general manager position. Mom nodded, confused. "Yes, he was furious when he didn't get the job. He said the owner was some recluse who didn't understand talent." I smiled, a small secret smile. "I am the owner, Mom. I am the recluse. The Obsidian Group isn't just one restaurant. It is a portfolio of 6 venues across Chicago and Atlanta. I started investing my salary 10 years ago when everyone thought I was just chopping vegetables. I built it brick by brick while Ebony was busy buying handbags. I reached into my bag and pulled out a photocopy of a rejection letter. It was dated 8 months ago. It was addressed to Bradley Davis, informing him that he lacked the necessary qualifications for management. At the bottom was a signature in black ink. S. Davis. Brad didn't get the job because I reviewed his application, I said quietly. I knew he was stealing from you even then, Mom. But I couldn't prove it. I knew he would run my business into the ground, just like he did your finances. So I rejected him. And today, I am buying your house so you never have to worry about money again. The $5 million goes into your personal account. You can travel. You can rest. You can live in the house or turn it into a museum for all I care. But it stays in the family. The right family. Mom stared at the letter, then at me. Tears welled up in her eyes again, but these were different. They were tears of pride, of relief, of overwhelming vindication. She didn't say a word. She just squeezed my hand so hard I thought my fingers might break. 3 weeks later, the air in Atlanta had shifted. The oppressive humidity had broken, giving way to a crisp golden autumn. I sat on the wrap-around porch of the house in Buckhead, my legs curled under me on the swing that my father had built 40 years ago. The lawn was immaculate again. I had hired a landscaping crew to replant the hydrangeas Brad had trampled. The dumpster was gone. The for sale sign was gone. The house looked like it was taking a deep breath after holding it for too long. Mom walked out onto the porch carrying a silver tray with 2 steaming porcelain cups. She looked 10 years younger. The stress lines around her mouth had softened, and she was humming a tune I hadn't heard her sing since I was a child. She set the tray down and sat beside me, looking out over the oak trees that lined our property. It is quiet, she said, sipping her tea. Earl Grey, just the way she liked it. It is, I agreed. The silence of peace, Mom. Not the silence of secrets. We sat there for a long time watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and fiery orange. It was the kind of evening that makes you believe in second chances. I had transferred the $5 million 2 days ago. Mom had immediately booked a cruise to the Mediterranean for the spring. She was talking about taking painting classes. She was talking about living. The peace was interrupted by the shrill ring of the landline phone inside the house. We both stiffened out of habit. The old cordless phone sat on the small table between us. I had plugged it back in yesterday mostly for emergencies. It rang again, and again. I looked at the caller ID. It read Fulton County Correctional Facility. Mom looked at the phone, then at me. Her expression hardened. She didn't move to answer it. She just took another sip of tea. I picked up the handset. I pressed the talk button. There was a crackle of static, and then a robotic voice spoke. You have a collect call from an inmate at the Fulton County Jail. Ebony Davis. To accept charges, press 1. To refuse, hang up. I pressed 1. The line clicked and I heard heavy breathing on the other end. It sounded desperate, ragged, and wet. Mom, is that you? It was Ebony. Her voice was unrecognizable. The arrogance was gone, scraped away by 3 weeks of prison food and cold concrete. Mom, please do not hang up. I used my one call for the week. I need bail money. The public defender says if I can post bond, I can fight this from the outside. Mom, it is awful in here. They took my shoes. The women are mean. I am scared, Mom. Please. I know you have the money now. I know Sophia bought the house. Just 100,000. That is all I need. I held the phone a few inches from my ear so Mom could hear. Mom stared at the device, her face completely blank. She didn't shake her head. She didn't nod. She just looked out at the sunset and took a bite of a tea cookie. She had already said her goodbye in that interrogation room. She had nothing left to say. I brought the phone back to my lips. Ebony. I said, my voice calm and bright like I was taking a dinner reservation. Sophia Ebony sounded confused. Put Mom on. I need to talk to Mom. Mom is busy enjoying her retirement, I said, watching my mother smile at a cardinal landing on the feeder. And as for the bail money, I am afraid there has been a slight administrative error in your calculations. What? What error? Ebony cried. Just ask her. She is my mother. She was your mother, I corrected gently. But you resigned from that position when you signed that death certificate. And as for the money, it is tied up. We are using it to remodel the kitchen. I am thinking of installing a pizza oven, in honor of the coupon you tried to bury her with. Sophia. You witch. You cannot leave me in here. Brad is testifying against me. He is blaming me for everything I know, I said soothingly. We sent Brad a fruit basket. He is singing like a canary. It is quite the performance. Better than your eulogy, actually. Sophia. Please listen, Ebony. I have to go, I said, my thumb hovering over the end call button. My tea is getting cold. And frankly, so is your trail. I will get out, I will come back. I do not think so, I said. But hey, look on the bright side. You always wanted a gated community with 24-hour security. Now you have one. Sophia. I am sorry, I whispered, leaning into the receiver. The number you have dialed has no inheritance. Please check the number and try again in 10 to 20 years. Good luck with the prison loaf. I clicked the button ending the call. The line went dead. The screaming stopped. I placed the phone back on the table. Mom reached over and patted my hand. Did she have anything important to say? Mom asked, looking at the clouds. No, I smiled, picking up my tea. Just a telemarketer selling guilt. I told them we are not buying. Mom laughed, a rich, full sound that echoed off the porch ceiling. We clinked our teacups together in the twilight. The house was safe. The villains were gone. And for the first time in a long time, the air tasted sweet. This journey taught me that blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. We cannot choose who we are born to, but we can certainly choose who we invite to our table. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let toxic people face the consequences of their own actions. If you have ever had to cut ties to save your own peace, let me know in the comments below. You are not alone, and you are stronger than you think. Hit like and subscribe for more stories from the kitchen of life, where the tea is always hot and the revenge is always served cold. This journey taught me that blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. We cannot choose our relatives, but we can choose who sits at our table. Sometimes the most self-loving act is allowing toxic people to face the consequences of their own greed. True success isn't just wealth. It is the peace of knowing your worth never depended on their validation. The best revenge is simply living a life they can no longer touch. If you have ever had to cut ties to save your peace, share your story in the comments. Hit like and subscribe for more revenge served cold.